Hello, can you hear me? Is that coming through fairly clearly? I hope so. Hello. Let me know when the audio is coming through, everyone, and we shall kick off. There's usually a bit of a delay, as ever. I also, at the last minute, corrected the corrected the name of the episode. I got the episode number wrong. Just shows how on it I am in terms of production. Hello. Good evening. Hello, everyone. Right, so this is going to be I think it should hopefully be... Well, I've not looked through... Well, I have looked through it in some reasonable detail, but I've basically, we're going to be going through the Carmont derailment interim report. That's today's episode. There's a little bit of stuff to start with, but we're going to get stuck in fairly quickly. It's going to be with this, it's going to be a fairly sober episode, I think. But also, we've got to think about we've got to learn from it, and in that learning, there's not just engineering things we need to learn. There are operational things we need to learn. So hopefully, it's going to be an episode where we'll still pick things out, lots of things for us to learn from it. And as ever with these things, they have broader application. Even outside of the railways, there's lots of process things that we can learn from. So I think it should be a good episode for us learning things, and looking forwards a bit. But also, yeah, it's not perhaps going to be the most upbeat of our episodes. But I think it's important. You can't, as an engineer, everything we learn from, everything we do, everything we. In fact, tell you what, let's do this. Hello, everyone. I'm here. Everything we do as engineers is on the back of previous learning, and a lot of that learning involves tragedy. And we can't shy away from that. We have to understand it and ensure we move forwards. Obviously, it's more sensitive with the recent incident, but we have. That's why we can't just put our heads in the sand. We have to look at the mistakes that were made and learn from them, and ideally learn from them quickly. So we're going to go through some of those things. I'm also going to put a bit of context. I'm going to start with I'm going to get on a soapbox at the start and talk about something which is, given kind of some of the discussions I have with people within the driver community, is something that's a bit of a taboo subject, actually. And I'm hoping maybe that the first third of this will provide some ammunition for people within maybe the unions, or certainly kind of the drivers community and maybe staff community, to maybe have a little bit of a think about some of the things that they're expected to do day to day. So, absolutely, to people pointing out that those who fail to learn from mistakes are doomed to repeat them. Absolutely, and I'm afraid we do far too often repeat mistakes, not just in this industry, but in engineering more broadly. So, let's get started, shall we? Before we crack on, the first thing is that I wanted to. In fact, I was asked to put up the COVID stats. So I've done that. They're updated every Wednesday, conveniently enough. So these are fresh from this morning, straight off the DFT website. And yeah, so tell you what, let me get my Wacom out so I can scribble on things. Always makes life a bit easier, doesn't it? So, what can I see here? Well, This is the whole trend from the start. So just as a reminder for anyone who hasn't maybe seen these trends, because it's been a while since I've put these up, I think. This down here, actually, rather I should say kind of here, this whole trend, these trends aren't absolute figures. These are relative to the equivalent pre-COVID day or week. So these are in relation to this baseline. And if COVID hadn't happened, you'd see all these trends kind of doing this, right? They'd be slowly kind of climbing up. And it might be a bit more sinusoidal, it might be a bit more like kind of daily like that, a bit like you see below. But actually, you'd see a general climb accounting for the kind of the growth. It wouldn't be quite that high. It might be about here. I think growth is like pre-pandemic growth was around about between 5 and 10%, something like that anyway. You'd see that trend. But actually, what we saw was, lockdowns being announced and rail dropping away very, very dramatically, as did road, as did everything, because we were all told to stay indoors, right? So, so you can see. So I've talked through this already, and we did an episode talking about this. So I'm not going to dwell on that. What I'm going to look at is kind of what's happened since the episode, which was kind of when was it? That was kind of around about here, wasn't it? That we had the episode, and we were kind of in the depths of a kind of a long lockdown. Actually, I'll probably, I'll probably get my miniaturized face up in the top corner, actually, while I'm talking about these. So, the important thing to look at is what's happening at the moment, which is the climb. Now, this dotted, so if I this dotted fig bit here is a bit dubious. I'm not quite sure where that's come from. I don't know whether it's in relation to. I don't quite know. That the dotted lines, by the way, are predictions. That's predicted, kind of projected figures, not the actual figures. The solid lines are the actual figures, and you can see I generally include the projected figures, and you can see they're all over the place. So not to worry too much about that. The key thing is to look at the solid line. You can see that we've got that growth. We're already now at the highest point. Essentially, we're basically at the level we were at. Last time we reached a peak, which was before the regional lockdown started hitting, which was back in September, which was around about 45%. That's around about the figure we've got, and we're almost back to 45% again now. What's key, and I think I talked about this, or maybe I haven't actually talked about this much. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's go to the next slide. So this is the total trend. So it gives you an idea of the overview. As ever, at me in. If you've got any queries or questions on any of this stuff. Let's have a look at the next one. This is slightly more zoomed in, so a bit more clarity. This is the annual, so I've broken this down. So I've got the 2020 number, and then this is 2021. And so you can see the climb. The key thing is how quickly that climb continues, and where it ends up. Like where the if you like, sort of if we've got like some form of asymptote. An asymptote is a line never quite reached. If you've got the projected increase going up, where's that asymptote going to be? Is it going to steady out, and then maybe is there going to be a bit of time, and then is it going to steadily climb, or is it going to be much lower? Is it going to stabilize much lower and stay like that forever? You know, that's the doom mongers are trying to suggest that. Or are we going to sort of see a pretty rapid climb, and then are we going to see a bit of this, and then is it going to do that? We don't really know. But what I think is going to happen is that we are going to have a pretty good idea fairly quickly. I think fairly quickly we are going to see. I think over the next. I think certainly by June we're going to have a pretty good idea of the shape of things. I think by that point we'll have seen bus services continue to climb. I think bus services will reach. I think they'll be over 80% by kind of June. I see the climb being quite rapid, quite sharp. Given that everyone's been sort of, there's this increasing pressure, if you like. It's almost like blowing up a balloon. Everyone's get that continued pressure of wanting to get out and about. I think we're going to see it climb. The other thing to note, of course, is essentially the inversely proportional relationship between driving and cycling. As driving generally drops, you'll see cycling generally climb. I mean, it is correlative rather than causative, but I dare say the relationship is not quite that. You know, it's they are not unrelated from each other. Anyway, so so cycling is depressingly. This is back. It's back to kind of stabilizing towards exactly where it was before the pandemic, which is kind of not great. It would have been really nice if it had kind of hovered around, kind of up here, but alas, not. Anyway, so. There's the discussion. Gareth Williams asked if there's any reason why bus travel is higher than rail. Yeah, we've talked about this in the previous in the actual big. I'd recommend going and listen to the coronavirus episode where we kind of coronavirus versus railways. I think the suggestion is partly to do with the fact that it can serve lower income deciles, so which means that people who are key workers might well have been using the bus a bit more. So that's one possible kind of explanation. Number two is that because of the packet size nature of buses, you know, a bus is like lots of individual packets, right? Whereas a train, has it's all one thing, so it comes less. Basically, you can distribute your social distancing better in individual buses than you can in kind of less frequent trains. To an extent, that might account for it. There's probably some, it's fairly unscientific, but those are suggestions, and the extent to which those influence it kind of remain to be seen. So let me. There is one last trend which I'm going to show you all, which is this, which is. I think it's interesting to look at. This is a graph that lots of people are probably familiar with. because for all sorts of reasons, not least, let me get my ink color to white. Not least because everyone goes, oh look at this, it's privatization. Oh, it's privatization resulted in this sudden climb in ridership. When actually no, the climb in ridership started in the early 80s. That continued, and then it's only Thatcher. It's only a kind of a massive early 90s recession that resulted in that dropping down again. After quite a long period of Thatcherism. It was never going to be there was never going to be quite the recovery. So when we had the crash in 2008, there's a bit of a dip, but because we'd had several years of people generally getting better off, people were able to recover, so we didn't see that drop in ridership. But the scary thing here, I think the important thing to note here, if I get rid of all my scribbles, is it's interesting to look at where this is now ridership from the it's kind of the latest annual figure from the previous year. 2019-20, and that figure, is that right? Is it 2019-20 or 2020-21? Yeah, I can't quite remember where the cutoff, the data set cutoff is actually, whether it's calendar or financial. I need to check. It's generally done quarterly and then aggregated. Anyway, the point is, this is the official annual stat. It's still provisional. It's not been fully finalized yet. But if you want to look at where that line sits, we officially have, ridership was lower in the last data collected year than it ever has been in recorded, in kind of certainly in the last 75 years, basically. So the last sort of 3/4 of a century. So the modern railway has never seen ridership that low. I think it's pretty staggering. But ridership is climbing quickly. Let's see what happens. I think it's important. There's a lot of doom and gloom. Go and listen to the coronavirus episode where I point out that everyone seems to have forgotten this thing called climate change, where we need to increase, bang the drum, we need to be doubling rail's capacity by the middle of this century. And, doom and gloom and recruitment freezes within Network Rail and cuts and changes to staffing in Network Rail are a completely ridiculous idea. Don't do those things. Anyway, so let's move on. Let's move on. I'm going to get rid of my face, and I'm going to bring us on to the next image, which I think is quite a poignant image. I always find images of it's difficult to be some of the most poignant images related to rail disasters are often of the people working on that. On the incident and the look on their faces and the kind of the appalling nature of the scenes they're being presented with, the kind of the carnage, the things that are, the upsetting scenes, having to rescue, the injuries and so on. And I actually thought this image, there was an image of a police officer looking bereft, but I thought this image is particularly poignant and indicative of kind of the nature of the northeast of Scotland, an area that I grew up in Inverurie. The northeast is somewhere I know very well. I know this line well, travelled on it a lot, and the idea that the Coast Guard was who were kind of a lot of the responders were actually Coast Guard staff, and it's. I just think this image of the kind of the Coast Guard vehicles parked up on the railway felt like a poignant one. We're going to talk about Carmont, and without further ado, all I can say is that this hopefully will be an insightful episode. There'll be lots to. I want this to be a discursive episode, so do chat. I don't want it to be don't want lots of silence in the chat. I want having lots of good discussion. I'm going to open with a bit of background on a particular subject that I think is very important as part of this, but it's by no means the whole picture. It's just one small facet of it. But without further ado, let's crack on. Let's kick off tonight's episode. The Intercity 225 fades out, I'm going to bring up it's a sober episode, but I think it's also it's an episode for learning and looking forward, so I don't want it to be entirely sober. Here is a picture of what do they actually call it? The Inter-7 City, but it's a short form HST. Here is the short form HST. There it is, and This is a vehicle we're going to talk about a bit. It's I think it's actually let's bring my miniaturized face up in the corner. Hello, everyone. I think there's I'm going to have some things to say about this vehicle, but this is the vehicle that was involved in the Carmont derailment. Before I talk any more about anything, also incidentally, you can see the vehicle it replaced in the background, which is a Class 170 Turbo Star. You can trace its lineage back to the old turbos. You can trace its lineage back to some of the old multiple unit stock. It's got British Rail kind of. It does have British Rail heritage very much. So before we press on any further, I'm just going to put a content warning up actually, because we are going to talk about some things. We are going to be talking about some pretty. Some of the descriptions, particularly in the report, might be upsetting for some people. There are going to be pictures of derailments, of damaged rail vehicles, and that might be really upsetting for people. So, yes, it's a content warning for people that might find that upsetting. I'm not just as a bit of a pre-warning. I think you might have expected it already, but just a bit of a pre-warning. So this incident, Carmont, this happened. We kind of go back to Carmont, which is in the northeast of Scotland. Go back to and the incident in question happened in the morning. It happened at just about 20 to 10 in the morning on Wednesday the 12th of August 2020. And this is the incident. This is an image that the Evening Express took, and it was the first image that I saw on the day that actually showed what had happened. It was the first image I saw that was in the public domain that allowed me to see what was going on. And by which I mean you can see over here what has happened, and you can see that there's a landslide of some form has come out here onto the track, and you can see wheels going into it. You can actually see, even from this distance, you can see the wheel set digging in. If I get rid of all this, you can see where the wheels have dug in. Those might not be the leading vehicle's wheels, by the way, because all the other vehicles' wheels actually, as the report says, actually went through the landslide without being derailed by it. It was only the leading power car that was derailed by it. The train, having gone through there, and we'll talk through this in the report, but you can see it's been derailed. The unfortunate circumstances, there was a bridge as well involved, and of the 6 vehicles involved in the incident, this is the leading power car, this is the trailing power car, and then the other vehicles there's a coach here, and the details of this we'll go into. There's the kind of the trailing coach here, but perhaps most upsettingly, there's another coach here that's rolled onto its roof, but I think most upsettingly there is also a coach that you might not be able to make out that is actually underneath both of these 2 coaches here, essentially squashed flat. So that's the incident, and I think before we talk any more about it, a lot of people quote this. Well, no, a lot of people quote other things. They quote first fatal derailment and all this. No, it's not. So the correct description, not that I particularly like these sorts of kind of headline-grabbing descriptions anyway. This is the first fatal derailment of a British mainline passenger train in 30 years. Key point being British mainline passenger train. A lot of the descriptions are saying first fatal derailment since Greyrig, which is not correct because it completely erases Sandylands, the Croydon tram derailment. This is a railway. Just because it's a tram, this is a rail. These are rails. This is the permanent way. This is a train. It has all the hallmarks of a railway system. Just because it's a tram does not, just because it's a tram and runs on roads occasionally, it is running on rails. It is a railway system. We should not erase the fact that this incident was an absolutely horrific incident that happened. Perhaps one that we'll explore in future because there's a lot to unpick about it. I think it's worth. I think I'd like to talk more about light rail stuff anyway. Not all the doom and gloom, some of the good stuff there. This was an absolutely awful tragedy. It was an incident that happened, and it was getting erased a lot in the news, and that really bothered me. The other point is that it erases a lot of other things that happen on the railway network. Exactly. Chris McKenna points out Sandylands was very much a railway accident and not a road accident. it is it was a rail. The incident was a railway incident. Oh, sorry. So you've got this. So the reason I put this up is because it's not just fatal. We can pat ourselves on the back all we like about the lack of fatal derailments that have been happening on the railway network, but I'd also like to point. Let me just change. Sorry, I just need to change my pointer color again so you can actually see what's going on. I'd also like to point out these are the fatalities that have been happening. These are non-staff, so kind of passenger fatalities that have been happening on the railway network. Actually, since Grey Rig, and you can see. So you got Grey Rig was in 2007. Actually, Grey Rig was in 2008, 2006, 2007 because I think it was early 2007. Might be wrong. People can get the date up there. I can't exactly remember what the date was. So actually, it's not in this. It is in the kind of the previous year. But anyway, so each of these are all fatalities that have that have happened on the railway, and also they're not including all the serious injuries that happen on the railway. And the majority of these are occurring or a large majority of these are occurring at the platform train interface. I know you've all heard me talking about level boarding before, or hopefully you all have. I'd recommend going and watching the previous episode about it. But this is a risk that is not reduced on our railway network, unlike all others, right? So this is and actually, if you look recently, there is an increasing trend. If you're looking at 5-year rolling averages, there is an increasing trend in passenger kind of non-workforce fatalities as the statistical measure is. So you can see here, falling from the platform edge. There's one as a result of assault and abuse. So there are lots of things going on here that we should not erase just by looking at the big scary rail crash related things. These are things we need to fix too. So sorry, that was just a quick word on kind of I think explaining that, which is very important. So let's very very quickly now talk about something fairly abstract but relevant. I'm going to start with talking about a thing that is very permanent way related. It's my discipline, which is derailed vehicle retention, and in particular, I say e.g. guardrails. Actually, that should probably be i.e. guardrails. And what I mean by guardrails are, well, firstly, this is a picture, I was talking about somber pictures of staff. This is a picture of the staff, and this is where the train has whizzed through here. It's not very clear because anyway, you sort of see what's going on. The train is going this direction. You can see it's taken out the parapet. You can see this troughing is all wrecked up. But there's no protection to stop it having rolled off. There's nothing that has stopped the train kind of rolling off the side. I'm going to change my pen colour again because red and green is a bit of a nightmare. Let's go with yellow. Hopefully that's a bit clearer. So yeah, the train's gone over here, and it's already by this point it's kind of dragging off the side. Now there's a tool we have as permanent way engineers that can protect structures or even just tall embankments. It's called guardrails, and I don't mean these things over here. I don't mean these. You can call these guardrails, but they're pedestrian guardrails. I mean permanent way guardrails. So a train approaching in this direction. So a train coming along this way, will if it gets derailed, its wheels will fall either side of the rails. The theory is that to then mount and ride over these guardrails requires quite a lot of additional energy. So if you've got a derailment that with a train that's generally going to be going broadly in line with quite a shallow angle with these guardrails will broadly keep the derailed train in line with the track and therefore on a structure or at the top, whether it's a bridge or an embankment. Their efficacy is, it's not guaranteed, but in sort of lots of collisions you'll find, and I'm hoping that and this is mentioned at the end of the report as a thing, the interim report is something that's being investigated. My hope is that basically the standards for applying these are pretty loose. David Clark is asking if the previous figures discount suicides. Yeah, those don't count suicides. I'm afraid to say that suicides account for a huge number of railway fatalities annually, hundreds of people. The 1920 year cuts off just after COVID hit, right? Possibly, Sakura. I'm not quite sure which bit you're referring to. Anyway, right, I'm going to press on because of time. So yeah, this is a guardrail, and one of the things, and I just put this picture up because before, rather than flicking back and forth, I kind of want to stick to the body of the report when we do. So that's something that's worth thinking about. The standards are very ambiguous as to where this gets applied. There's not a rigid set of clear standards. It's risk based, and as a result of it being risk based, you can almost black box in and out anything you like to decide whether you do or don't want a guardrail. It generally falls on engineers' preference and kind of how assertive in the case of Network Rail, how assertive the contractor's responsible engineer is, kind of the lead design engineer is. So that's guardrails. And you can see that if the guardrail had been placed here, there's a potential that if you'd had a guardrail, so you'd have a guardrail here on the approach to the bridge, it would run through the structure, by the way, and then it would run through the structure, and then it would flare at the other end, and likewise, you're kind of doing the same the other direction. There's a chance that if you had a guardrail, the vehicle, the leading power car would have been kept in line over the structure, and you wouldn't have had the vehicles pulling off over, and you wouldn't have had as severe a collision. So that's the investigation is looking at that in more detail, but I think that's something that is relevant, and I think it's something that Network Rail should be looking at in advance of this. Let me see. So, Ella, let's see. Right. There's some good discussion. Yeah, if you want me in on this, I'm glad there's some good discussion happening. If you want me in on that, just at me in, and I'll cover it. Gareth asks, would guardrails help dissipate the energy in a derailment? It's not so much about dissipation. It's more they mean the train will continue in line, which is important because it helps with coupler integrity, and it means that if the vehicle is burying its wheels into ballast and breaking sleepers, that does mean you dissipate energy better than if it's rolling off down an embankment without anything pinning the wheels, potentially gaining rather than losing momentum. So, yes, you could. I think some people are seeing this picture, these pictures, and I say these are not nice pictures. They show how much of an impact, how awful this incident was. So yeah, these pictures are going to show the scale of this incident, right? So we're going to now talk about the subject that I think a lot of people were expecting me to talk about, rightly, which is crashworthiness. Particularly, I'm going to talk about crashworthiness. I'm going to cover some quick kind of GB examples. Actually, just very loosely, I'm going to talk about kind of unpowered coaching stock, because it covering those gives a useful timeline of the way that crashworthiness is developed. So we're going to start with the BR Mark 1 coach, 1951. Just an enormous number of these were made. Absolutely huge numbers of these were kind of created. Just huge numbers. I don't even know how. Just lots, thousands of them were built. They kept building these until 1974. And it was considered, and lots of, 1974 includes all the multiple units that were using the Mark 1 coach design. In the 1950s, these were considered to have decent crashworthiness, but that's because everything was made of matchsticks at the time. So these were, they had all steel construction. These were considered to be, they did have decent crashworthiness, but that was in 1951. We still had timber frame vehicles traveling around at the time. Ella's asking, Eddie Owen is asking, would the outside rail act as a guardrail in this case? So you potentially have both, actually. You can have flared outer rails on the approach to structure, then guardrails on the inside. There's kind of quite a lot you can do with guardrails. There's a variety of a variety of layouts you can use depending on what sort of track layout you have, what energy you're planning to dissipate. And some of that's from engineering insight, some kind of intuition, some of it's from risk assessment, some of it's from a more detailed analysis. Ella is saying, would you say that guardrails are more about energy redirection? Yeah, so you're not, all you're doing is sort of trying to keep the vehicle in line with the track. That's what guardrails are all about. They're not really doing anything more than just keeping they're not really about energy dissipation. They're just about keeping the train on the track and helping to do, and by doing that, by keeping the train on the track, you're stopping it from going off and hitting things that it shouldn't be. Chris Jackson, Japan is fitting guardrails on extensive sections of Shinkansen Viaduct to reduce the derailment-related risks in the event of an earthquake. Yeah, so to be honest, it's a similar approach I expect to see in the UK or in GB, certainly based on the fact that we are having an increasing number of... There is an increasing risk in landslip, in climate-related failures, and as a result of that, we maybe need to think about better mitigation. Discussion. So there we are. Yeah. Chris Jackson saying around 4,500 Mark 1 hold stock and a similar number of multiple units. That's a huge volume of rolling stock. Anyway, so sorry, I digress. So the Mark 1 coach, 1951, and at 37 years old, the Mark 1 coaching stock was involved in probably its most notorious crash, although it had been involved in lots of other crashes, derailments. So this was Clapham. By this point, I'm sorry, but these trains were already well past their use-by date. So at 37 years old, you had Clapham, which is a pretty horrific rail crash. And to be honest, when you, in terms of the coaches that were in amongst the thick of that crash, this next picture basically shows all that was left of them. It's just not a lot left. Let me just do this. Yeah, so not a lot left of them, to be honest. These disintegrated completely. And it still took until, so the Mark 1 coach, it was kind of retired from mainline service in 2005. Actually, I've got the number of 2010 for like getting them properly out of timetable mainline use, which might be the case for the multiple unit stock relying on it. So actually, that I should have put that. So actually, that was, I say 54 years after introduction, but actually that's really 59 years if it was 2010 for the multiple units. They're basically identical to the coaching stock. So that's 50, around just over 50 years that they were in service. Far too long, but that's how long they were in service for, right? Let's move on to the Mark II coach. Now, this had, interestingly, it had less of like a particularly interesting service because it, so only about 2,000 of these, 1,800 of these were built between 63 and 77, there it is, nice Mark II coach there, and they're quite an advancement on the Mark I. But still, they're still fundamentally a pretty, they're not. Oh, someone asked a very important question, but they didn't add me in, and I forgot about it, and I've just remembered. What is crashworthiness? Well, okay, and this will get explained as I go through. Crashworthiness is the behaviour of a vehicle when it's come off the rails. So whether that's things like, whether it's, I do need my scribblies. Whether that's looking at the robustness of the couplers. So how well the kind of couplers behave to kind of keep the vehicle in line and stop it twisting or indeed snapping. And ideally in a derailment, you want the train to stay upright. The coupler helps with that. You also want all the various coaches to stay connected to each other because that generally helps keep them in line as well. So the behaviour of couplers is one. The way that bogies behave, these are bogies, which is a bogie is a frame connecting two axles with four wheels on it. That allows kind of longer vehicles to negotiate tighter curves. How well these stay attached to the train is another key point of crashworthiness, bogie retention as it's called. Things like window integrity, do the windows all smash and frankly people get flung out of them? This is something that happens. That's an important query. And another one is how do they behave in terms of how they move? So this is also, end crumple zones. So does this kind of get all squished up and messed up in order to absorb, so likewise at the other end, so that you have what's known as collision energy management. So rather than you don't want to have a completely robust coach because you turn everyone inside, everyone inside will suffer from horrible forces and get thrown around horribly. So actually you aim to be absorbing megajoules worth of energy in designing structures that absorb energy at the ends, just like a car. You have a crumple zone in a car. It's the same for modern design of rolling stock. The other thing is then things like bending strength, so how much the vehicle kind of bends, either kind of in this plane or sort of in this way as well. You also have rollover strength, so that's the extent to which this thing can get squashed from various angles, whether it's squashed flat or kind of so. So you've got all these different sorts of forces being, and the standards have. The standard's been updated quite a bit in more recent years. There was a lot of work in the 90s to improve vehicle crashworthiness. Actually, a lot of work going on in Europe, actually. Interestingly, the early Pendolinos, the early Fiat, when they were manufacturing the early Pendolinos, they were doing a lot, subsequently consumed by what is now Alstom. We're doing a huge amount of work on double-skinned aluminium rolling stock and improving that crashworthiness. And as a result of that, we benefit from that in the UK. Because of privatisation, we actually fell quite dramatically behind in terms of crashworthiness development. Anyway, on with our kind of brief potted history. Oh, College. So yeah, the Mark II was in quite a few instances, but no really high energy ones. I think possibly there were some Mark IIs at College, but all of these, you can see all these corrugated roofs. These are all Mark III coaches. The corrugated roofs are all Mark IIIs, and this is a Mark I. This is unmistakably a Mark I over here, which is not fared particularly well. You can see it's been squashed kind of into parallelogram. I think this is a Mark II. Is it? Oh no, that's a Mark III as well. There are Mark II coaches in here, but again, I'm not sure the extent. So I'm not sure the extent to which high energy instance tested the Mark IIs. I couldn't find any. I couldn't recall any. There might well be some. Yes, so that's the Mark II coach, which was retired from mainline service, I think, in 2012, which was again about 50 years after their introduction. You could argue that that's 50 years is not a bad run for rolling stock. Let's see, have a look at this. Chris Jackson saying crashworthiness also includes energy absorption in a collision when the vehicles are not derailed. Yes, indeed. So yeah, lots of things like that. And these countries have critical zones. Yep, covered that one, Matt. Gareth Williams, did privatisation play a part in delaying the withdrawal of Mark 1 stock? Absolutely it did, yes. The rolling stock operating companies had zero interest financially in coming up with new rolling stock. So privatisation absolutely worsened the safety on our railways in relation to a huge number of things. That's definitely true. But that, to an extent, might well... You can very likely say that about nationalisation when it happened in 1948. Major... kind of drastic changes. Often the benefit of nationalisation was at least that things were still being kept, that you weren't doing the fragmentation. It's the fragmentation of privatisation that was the real hit to safety. But massive change, ideological change, is not necessarily a good thing on a railway. Incremental alterations based on best practice and best understanding of practice is a far better way to do things. So that's the Mark II coach. The Mark III coach, which was actually prototyped in 1968. This is an old coach, folks. The Mark III coach is an old coach. Here it is. There were so 19. So where am I? I'm just having a look at some of my pace notes here that I've got just to make sure I'm saying things that are useful. Yeah. So sorry. Yeah, college. I've said all that stuff. These were kind of designed in 68. They were designed in 68, and then prototypes ended up getting rolled out in 72. But they were designed in the late 60s. They were designed only 5 years after the Mark IIs. They took a lot of knowledge from the Mark IIs, but they did leap quite further forwards. I think, what was it, about 850 of these were built. Compared to contemporary stock in the 1970s, the crashworthiness of the Mark III coach was good. In the 1970s, crashworthiness was again, it was good in the 1980s, but there was a leap forwards in, well, a few things happened. There was a leap forwards in the development of rolling stock through the mid to late 80s and through the 90s. You had a lot of new kind of welding techniques. You had a lot of new design techniques. Aluminium became very popular as a means of, and yes, if you look at Ladbroke Grove and you compare the way that the aluminium bodied turbo and the HST interact with each other, the turbo came off worse. The reason it came off worse is because it had, well, firstly, the welding was pretty shoddy in the manufacture of those vehicles, and also that they let's just say that the design of those turbos was not to the level that you'd look at modern aluminium vehicles to have. The modern aluminium rail vehicles are substantially more crashworthy than the original turbos were. So, Mark III coaches. What else have I got to say about them? Well, not much more than only at 36 years old. So this is 2004. We had kind of the most recent major high-speed incident involving Mark III coaches, which is here at Ufton Nervet. So a level crossing, someone drove their car in front of the train deliberately, derailed it. It was split by some points. I think I've talked about Ufton Nervet before. Actually, I talk about in my lectures as a thing for designers to always look beyond. Designers to always don't just look at the rail strings. If there are any designers watching this, don't just look at the 3D rail strings. Go to Google Earth and look at the damn site and see what's going on, because points like this should just never be this close to a level crossing. This level crossing's now been replaced with the bridge, I think. Anyway, not good. You can see that the Mark III coaches they've not fared well down here. They've not fared well at all. So here's some pictures of close-ups of these, and you can see when we talk about crashworthiness, this is bending strength. This has been bent. It's a coach that has been bent. Almost like it's been bent over someone's knee. Not good. And then again, this image, which I think this coach, I bring up again in another picture. This coach here, you can see the rollover strength. I think that's been struck by a bogie that's been released from another vehicle, and that's caused the damage there. So a lot of damage, a lot of energy was dissipated in this crash. So the Mark III coach, it's still not retired from mainline service, and we're 53 years after their kind of, well, I said after introduction, it's a little less than that from them being introduced. They were introduced in 72, so, but it's nearly 50 years. These are 50-year-old trains. The turbo units did have lots of flawed welding. The weld testing showed that pretty much all of the welding on those units was the weld material, which should always be stronger than the parent material, is actually weaker than the parent material, which means that the weld becomes the weak point. Not good. Anyway, the Mark IV coach. This is the last of the homegrown British Rail coaches, if you like. Developed in 1989. Developed and then built in 1989. There are only 302 of these built. I have a soft spot for the Mark IVs. They were built with kind of slightly tilted profile. Sorry, a slightly kind of raked profile on the potential that they might end up tilting, which they never did. So some people prefer the Mark IIIs. I always prefer the Mark IVs. I never got the fuss about the Mark IIIs. But anyway, they're nice rolling stock. I did like this livery. Some people didn't like this livery. This is the GNER livery. It's not the livery they arrived in, but they do look very nice. I tried to find one in Swallow, but it just doesn't. There don't seem to be any good high-res pictures of in Swallow livery, which is a shame. Weren't the Mark IIIs built mostly for override strength? Yeah, that's a very good point. So these things were built so that they didn't. A lot of the issues you had with the Mark I coach was that they'd telescope, which is essentially where two coaches rode into each other. Actually rode in. And sorry, the Mark Is even were built to avoid telescope, and they were designed, but they still you still had this issue. They still had the issue with the energies involved. Telescoping, where the bodies just kind of crumple through each other like a telescope being compressed. The Mark IIs and then again the Mark IIIs particularly. The Mark IIIs were very robust, they're very strong, but they had no energy absorbing features. They were just designed to be quite strong. They had kind of the first to have fully integral monocoque chassis-ish. And as a result of that, as a result of the fact they were kind of leading the way in being monocoque chassis, they didn't incorporate lots of the things that only a few years later monocoque chassis did. So whilst they were quite a step forward from the stuff the Mark IIIs replaced, they were quite far behind things that came only very recently afterward, kind of very shortly afterwards. But we built a lot of them and they lasted a while. So we didn't build anything new in terms of coaching stock until the Mark IVs for the Intercity 225s on the East Coast Mainline. Anyway, so I don't really have much more to say about the Mark IVs. They've tragically been tested in two major derailments. First was at Hatfield, which I've talked a lot about, I think, in a previous episode, actually. That these were tested, and actually at this point you can see all the couplers the couplers have held. Actually, the only point where they didn't hold was where, and it's pretty difficult circumstances given that an entire rail disintegrated under the train as it was moving, but essentially the vehicle kind of rolled over and then struck an OLE mast, and then that's where a lot of the damage and indeed the injuries and fatalities occurred. Great heck. So as some of you might know, this locomotive here is the same locomotive as the one that was involved in this incident here, which is Great Heck, which I talked about on Well There's Your Problem podcast, and I actually talked about quite a lot of this in the Well There's Your Problem podcast. And indeed, I've lifted these slides from the ones that I sent over to Justin and the crew. Great Heck, the Selby kind of derailment was a horrific crash as a result of a negligent driver on the road. Not train drivers. The railway was entirely free from guilt in this situation. Just lots of unfortunate Swiss cheese holes all lining up at once. The forces involved in this were absolutely horrific, and the coaching stock didn't survive well where the energy levels were huge. But where the energy levels were down to, if this had been Mark III coaching stock, it would have been even worse. The coaching stock did all right. But again, this coaching stock is still designed broadly with the same design principles as the Mark III stock in terms of its great leaps and bounds, but still not incorporating lots of the features, some of the anti-climb features, some of the energy absorption features that modern rolling stock has, and indeed some of the rollover strength. The images, as I said, this is why I did a kind of a content warning. These images are horrifying and upsetting. Remember, I should remind everyone that rail is by far the safest way to move on land. Americans love their TV programs about rail crashes, and they fixate on them, and I think it impacts on people's views of the railway as a non-safe. And there's all sorts of films about rail crashes. The reality is that railways are an incredibly safe way to move around. You're like 400 times safer inside the train than you are walking to the station. you are 21 times safer. You're 21 times more likely to be killed or severely injured in a car than you are in a train. Trains are incredibly safe. That doesn't mean we should. The reason we're looking at images, the reason that we kind of dwell on some of these things is, for me as an engineer, is so I can learn from it. Ella developers saying wrong elevators are. Yeah, but elevators, no. Yeah, sorry, Matt Baker, if you joined after the content. Well, that's a very good point. Yes, so, let's see. There's some interesting discussion going on that. Chris Jackson, what are you saying about official designation? That looks kind of interesting. Anyway, right, so. Right. No, the Mark V isn't in this list because the Mark V comes afterwards, and I don't know much about the crashworthiness of the Mark Vs, although I assume although I don't hold CAF maybe in particularly high regard, I assume they are built to meet current standards, and the crashworthiness standards since the mid 2000s have leapt forward. So the crashworthiness of a train built before the mid 2000s and after so kind of almost before 2010 and after 2010, there is a huge difference in crashworthiness because the standards have really stepped up. Interestingly, they've stepped up at the expense of low-speed derailments, as we learned at Neville Hill with that IET crash, but that's another discussion. Someone was asking about Jacobs bogies. Owen O'Neill and someone else previously was asking about Jacobs bogies. Jacobs bogies are where the bogie is not, rather than being underneath each coach individually. I should have a train up here, shouldn't I? Just get a Hornby coach up here. Rather than having the bogies, a bogie underneath. Let me draw this thing. What's the best way to draw this? Probably not with let's do it here. So rather than having the bogies underneath each wheel, like kind of each like this, and then likewise here, you have the bogies underneath each wheel set. You have bogies that are set up like this, where you have and there we go. The bogie actually sits underneath each one, and likewise you have a bogie sort of set between, and then kind of when you've got the at the front, you'll obviously have a single bogie. But the point is, the Jacobs bogie, Jacobs bogie. My terrible handwriting. A Jacobs bogie there rather than a conventional bogie. And yes, those do. So where those have we've had there have been derailments. There have been derailments of the kind of the TGV based stock have derailed at very high speeds and have been kept in line because of Jacobs bogies. So Jacobs bogies are very good for keeping the vehicle in line and crashworthiness. So let me first of all clear all this. So the Mark IV coach is still in operation. It's only 32 years after it was introduced. They're still youngish rolling stock, but again, as I say, that leap that's happened in pretty recent years, only about 10-15 years ago, that leap in crashworthiness means that pretty much anything before the mid-2000s has quite a different, certainly before 2000, but anything before the mid-2000s has quite a different crashworthiness rating to modern stock. And a good example of that is if I look at some 7-year-old stock, so some stock that was developed, I mentioned Fiat earlier, later gobbled up by Alstom. They were developing their Pendolinos, which then later evolved into our Pendolino, our Class 390, which was involved in the derailment at Greyrig, which was the last mainline fatal derailment. A Glaswegian lady lost her life in this incident, in this derailment. But the reason I want to talk about Greyrig is because Greyrig and Carmont have a lot of similarities in that you had a flat-ish curve, you have a train derailing as a result of something it struck. In the case of the derailment mechanism was quite different in Greyrig because it struck a set of S&C that split apart. In the case of Carmont, it was striking that landslide and being sent immediately to the outside. But in the case of Greyrig, you have a larger train, you have more momentum, you have higher speeds, and you have a substantially better vehicle performance. These vehicles were subjected to immense forces, and you can see that the couplers have performed pretty damn well. You've got coupler failures down here, but actually couplers have kept the train broadly in line throughout. You can see that the fact you can see all the bogies here. All the bogies have been almost all the bogies. I'm not sure if all the bogies, but almost all the bogies have been retained, which means that you don't have 3 or 4 tons of metal flying around, and you have. And you can see that in terms of damage to the vehicle, the rollover strength of these vehicles the deformation is minimal. These are very strong vehicles, very crashworthy train. It's spelled Jacobs. Actually, SM6 Allegro. They can be spelled Jacobs, but actually they are commonly spelled Jacobs with a C. They've been kind of in common parlance as Jacobs bogies with a C for a long time. So both are correct. So compare that to, here's another image of Carmont, 52-year-old stock crashing in kind of coming off the rails, derailing in 2020, and you can see the difference. Yeah. You've got bogies have all come flying out in all directions. You have rolling stock that's rolled over, it's split apart. You don't have the level of by the time you get to the end of the train, this train's still largely railed. The energy has been dissipated by the leading vehicles. In this tree is the power car, and you can see these vehicles are hugely damaged, smashed windows. And the last thing to point out, I don't think. This looks like it's just something flat that has been rendered with the imagery of the livery of a Mark III Inter7 City coach. This has been completely crushed. It's just absolutely appalling. The huge difference. And so I want to very briefly, I'm already conscious of time, I'm already conscious that we're going through, and this is potentially going to be a longer episode, but I think it's worth us going through and understanding what we can from this. So I'm just going to throw some comparisons up between these two incidents, right? Because I think it's relevant to the discussion I'm going to go through. I'm not going to dwell. I'm going to hammer through the next few slides because I think I don't want to make the point. I think I want the point to be made to you. So Greyrig in 2007, you had the speed. The train was going at 95 miles an hour when it derailed, 153 kilometers an hour. At Carmont, the train was going at 73 miles an hour, so 117 kilometers an hour. The train mass at Greyrig, 466 tons. At Carmont, only 275 tons, quite a lot less. So the energy involved in the collision at Greyrig, you had the train energy. So that's the kind of the energy that had to be dissipated from the point that the train derailed. You have 421 megajoules at Greyrig. That's an enormous amount of energy to dissipate. The energy at Carmont was a small fraction of that, only 145 megajoules. To kind of put that in kind of percentages, if you like, Carmont only involved 34% of the energy dissipation that was involved at Greyrig. So quite a lot less energy dissipation, right? So kind of a couple of other things that maybe to see off, like but a couple of other buts. Well, the uncompensated cant deficiency. So this is the curvature. So this is in the case of Carmont, I've estimated this based on the point of derailment and the fact that it derailed on a transition rather than on constant geometry, which makes things a little bit more complicated. But the uncompensated cant deficiency. So this is essentially the lateral acceleration being submitted onto the vehicle, how much it's being pulled off the alignment. At Greyrig, it was looking at the geometry, not quite double, but kind of substantially larger than the lateral acceleration being submitted on the vehicle at the point at which it derailed at Carmont. So you can't argue, but it was being thrown off the embankment more rapidly. The other point is the height of the embankment. At Greyrig, the embankment was 15 metres high. At Carmont, it was only 12 metres high. So again, in terms of energy dissipation, yes, at Carmont there was a bridge where there wasn't a bridge, but at Greyrig there were OLE masts. So in terms of comparing these, I think it's a valid comparison to look at the difference between the difference between Greyrig here, which was a much more full train. Frankly, it's something massively fortuitous. It's not fortuitous fortuitous is the right word. Carmont was a tragedy and 3 people were killed, and everyone on the train, the other 6 passengers, were all seriously injured. But thank goodness it was not a busy train, because the damage at particularly this coach here is the damage at that coach, particularly that kind of coach in the middle of the train, is horrific. Absolutely horrific. And I think comparing these two is not a... I've had people accusing me of this being an irrelevant comparison. I'm sorry, this is not an irrelevant comparison. This is an entirely relevant comparison, because the Class 390, which is involved in a higher energy collision with more extraneous, more aggressive circumstances, performed substantially better than the 50-year-old HST, as you'd expect it to. But that raises the question about why are HSTs running. So let's very quickly pick into features about the HST. So key thing, here's the HST, much beloved. I love the HST. I adore it, but it's a museum piece, right? These were fantastic. They were revolutionary at the time. Well, actually, I occasionally argue that the air-conditioned Mark III coaches are more important than the HST itself. But anyway, the HST meant that average speeds of journeys in Britain were the highest in the world. Lots of good stuff about the HST, but it's a history piece, right? 50 years old, it shouldn't be running anymore. And through the 90s, with an increase in the safety reduction as a result of privatisation, as a result of fragmentation, as a result of a variety of things, not all privatisation related, but lots of things coming in to get all together at once, resulted in a series of serious high-speed collisions on the Great Western. There were two. You had Southall and you had Ladbroke Grove, both horrific. This is Southall, where because the AWS had been isolated, the train collided with a freight train that was crossing. And, well, thankfully for the driver, well, actually, we'll get to the driver in a second, but you can see that the scale of the destruction to these coaches, this is an incredibly high-energy collision, right? This is huge high energy, so even the Pendolino would have fared very, very poorly in this collision. It was huge energy involved, but possibly not this poorly. I think the main thing we'll get to is so we've shown you that, but anyway, right, crashworthiness. Let's talk about passenger vehicle integrity. Here's a Mark III from Afton Nervet, and you can see the damage that's been done to this vehicle as it's rolled over. It's not performed well. Whereas you look at the equivalent of a derailment, again, similar energy. This isn't involving there's no embankment involved here. You can see the damage compared to a vehicle that is rolled over an embankment with a huge amount of force in it. That's actually been pulled over. It's had the same bending forces potentially that you saw it, or sort of. Kind of, it's had bending forces on it because it's got certainly in the case of Afton Nervet, Afton Nervet, you saw, actually they're kind of quite a way back, I think, aren't they? If I whiz back and show Afton Nervet. So Afton Nervet, you can see coaches being twisted here. There was no collision with another train here, and yet the fact that the vehicle was jackknifing, you ended up with this failure. Whereas if we skip forwards to back to Grey Rig, similar forces here, and there's no such bending going on. In fact, the train almost looks like you could put it back on the tracks. And again, come back to this picture. The performance is not great. So, what other features are there? Bogie retention. This is key. So this picture here, you can see the bogies you can see where the bogies have come off. I'm actually not going to point at the screen anymore because I think it's kind of a little bit disrespectful to kind of point all over the thing. So I'm going to stop scribbling all over this, but I think you can see what's going on. You can see the bogies are flown around. Bogie, in this case, it doesn't look like bogie retention has been a particular issue, although actually the bogies not being retained meant that the energy was dissipated differently and the vehicles could come off the track more easily. So, as we'll get to in the report, the mass of a BT10 bogie, which is the bogie of each of these bogies here under the HST, is 5.5 tons. So those 5.5 ton bogies flying around at speed is not a good thing. And actually, this is the report from Afton Nervet, and actually, I will scribble here because basically the point is here that if I can find my mouse, if bogies had been let me just go in here, change this to red. If the bogies had been retained, they would have arrested the train under more controlled conditions, albeit with high decelerations. Yeah, so bogie retention is a key thing. Also, kind of further down, you can see kind of damage resulting from it. So lots of things. Yeah, lots of issues here that bogie retention is very important. So let's look at another thing of crashworthiness, which is coupler behaviour. Again, a critical part of crashworthiness. This is a Janney coupler, which is similar to the Alliance couplers that are used on the HSTs. I think this is an Alliance coupler. It's hooked onto the front of either end of an Intercity 225. In this case, it's kind of a Janney knuckle coupler, and the performance of these couplers is not great. To be honest, again, coupler performance, you can see by the spray of the vehicle that the couplers failed all over the place. They failed, and so there are interesting points here that I pulled out of Afton Nervet that are really key. I think so. Kind of behaviour of the couplers being examined in terms of how they arrest the vehicle, the way it moves around, and you can see here that the report concludes that the resistance of the coupler to relative roll of the vehicle is low. Because you end up with rotation and a few things. Coupler heads not gripping each other tightly, and a kind of vertical movements. These do not perform well in incidents. That's essentially the point of me putting this up. You can pause this and read it later, or you can download the Afton Nervet report and have a read of it, which, by the way, was toned down. Someone's saying that was a Class 90. Yeah, same deal. That's the front of a Class... Is it a Class 90? It's got the dark blue... I don't know that is a Class 90, actually, because it's got the dark... I don't think it is, because it looks like it's next to a Pacer as well, which looks Leedsy. It looks like it's got West Yorkshire Metro colours. Anyway, you can download the Afternoon report, I'd recommend, but that report is, and I have on good authority from several sources, somewhat toned down in relation to the HSTs than it might otherwise have been. The cab structure, this is a really key thing that gets overlooked, I think, by just looking at the coaches. This is not even modern cab structure. This is a reasonably modern bit of cab structure. This is the inside of a Meridian Class 222, and you can see all that steel work there protecting the cab. There's crashworthiness. There are anti-climbers at the front to stop the cab riding up if it collides. Yeah, there are lots of features here to protect the driver, to protect the person inside the cab. Huge amounts of kind of steelwork protecting them. It's integral to the structure so that the cab doesn't just kind of fly away separately. It's integral to the vehicle, the crashworthiness, the crumple zones, etc. This is an example where potentially the poor crashworthiness of the total lack of crash structure in an HST was fortuitous, in that the cab was just ripped apart and ripped to one side by the glancing blow of a coal wagon, rather than if it was a proper crash structure, you might have had more energy absorption. But actually, arguably, that would have resulted in more energy absorption at the power car, which would have in turn reduced the energy absorption, and it would have deflected the vehicles, so arguably a lesser impact for passengers. Anyway, the reason this is useful is because it shows a cross section of the HST cab and shows you that it is essentially an upturned bathtub mounted facing outwards with a driver inside it. There is zero crash structure for the cab. So that absolutely zero. Absolutely zero crashworthiness whatsoever. Zero cab structure, zero protection for the driver. There is the base of the front of the HST with fiberglass shell over the front. There is no crash structure at all. This is what I'm not going to draw on here. I'm going to let you look and pick out what you can see. This is the power car. This is an image of the power car just after the collision, still on fire at Carmont. And the cab structure isn't there. The cab structure has been entirely. It's just gone. It has entirely disappeared. And we'll read through why that might be in the report, which I am going to get to. I know it's already 8 o'clock. Crikey, time has gone. But I think this stuff is important. And you can sort of see again the power car having burnt out is in the middle here, and you can sort of see, it allows you to see which orientation it has. It allows you to pick out what's happened and what is no longer there. And there's an image here which I'm going to zoom in on, which I think shows you part of the cab structure not being anywhere near the power car. I'm not going to draw on the thing because I think it's not right to do that, but I think anyone looking at this can see some of where the debris from the cab has ended up. So if I read this out, I'm going to read these words. So the first here is actually from the Cullen report, which is about Ladbroke Grove. So this is just, and then I'm going to read from After Nerve as well. In the leading power car of the HST, the driver's survival space was, in the words of the experts, severely compromised. The cab, which was constructed of GRP, which is basically plastic, it's fiberglass, would not meet modern structural requirements. Dr. Kirk expressed the view that the cab had no significant structural strength, that it could not resist loads above the underframe. The underframe being the kind of the flat bit, almost like if you imagine kind of the top bit of or the bottom part of a kind of a flatbed kind of wagon. That's basically what the HST looks like. It's a flatbed wagon with kind of the engine and the cab sat on top of it. Could not resist loads above the underframe, and that it provided minimal protection for the driver in a collision. However, the experts were in agreement that even if so the next bit is just talking about the context of the crash and the high energy, but that first section is the critical one. And likewise, after Nerve, HST power cars have a strong fabricated steel underframe to support the power equipment. The superstructure is much weaker and essentially non-structural. A GRP cab module with some lightweight steel snifting members houses the driver console and is bolted to the front of the power car. The power car was designed in the early 1970s. It does not meet the strength requirements of modern standards. So that's the cab structure. No protection for drivers whatsoever. So my conclusion for all that, and I'm going to get to the report momentarily, but I think you can agree, hopefully seeing that, maybe you don't agree, but hopefully I'm making the case why I don't think the HST, the high-speed train, the Intercity 125, or any of its derivative kind of formations should be in regular service. And I actually mean passenger or freight there. I know that there are currently moves to look at operating high-speed freight using HSTs, and ignoring the fact they're diesel engines and shouldn't be on the network anyway, they should not be. They just simply should not be run. Drivers should not be forced to, or should not be operating these trains. It's as simple as that. They're not protected at all. I'm amazed that they have not been blacklisted. They were not blacklisted as a result of Carmont. I'm absolutely amazed by it. I realise that there are some pressures within the unions that these are a beloved train, and it feels like these are, much loved, and there's a taboo to sort of talk against them. But as a driver, if I was a new driver, I would be incredibly unhappy if I found myself driving these around rather than driving around a new train. So yeah, I don't think these should be in service anymore at all. The charters, okay, that's fine. They're different. Charters are kind of generally treated slightly differently. So it's charters, okay. But I don't think these should be in regular passenger or freight service. I don't think these should be in timetabled service. So, and here's an image of tidy up after the derailment. So that for me is my prompt to bring up the report at last. 6 minutes past 8. We're going to talk about the report. So this is the interim RAIB report, the Rail Accident Investigation Branch. So the details in this are not necessarily perfect. Yeah, not necessarily perfect, but they might get updated as the report gets updated. Another key point, and they always put this in the front, this is not a thing to allocate blame. This is just looking at the circumstances and understanding where we can learn from it. So this is not about allocation of blame or liability. So don't try and there's not trying to look at blame. We're trying to learn from what's happened. Jordan Jack, do you mind if I clip this? Clip this? Clip it, as in take the video out and use it. Yeah, sure. As long as you attribute me. Gareth, does what you're saying apply to Mark III derived DEMUs? Yeah, I think so. I think the Mark III derived DEM kind of multiple units. The safety of these should, kind of where they're operating should be considered. But the issue with those is they're not traveling as fast. I think there's and they're also not necessarily. Yeah, I think the issue that they're not traveling as speedily helps, but also, I've not mentioned accessibility here, but accessibility, from my perspective, is a good enough reason that HST shouldn't be operating anymore. The Mark III stock shouldn't be operating anymore. So, I'm going to press on, but I think you can understand my. I think hopefully I've laid out the case why that stock shouldn't be running anymore. So let's have a read through this, and I'll just say again, I've not got a slide here, but I need to put another content warning because some of what I read here is going to be. It's going to be upsetting for people to read some of the detail. If you've never looked at a crash report before, they go into quite specific detail about what happens to the vehicle and the way the vehicle behaves through the derailment. And this might get more detailed as I expect it to get more detailed as the final report comes out, because they learn more. They often run simulations to understand the way the vehicles will have behaved. So there's a discussion. So the kind of the summary is at the start, explaining kind of what happened. So it kind of at 9:37 hours around 9:37 on Wednesday, the 12th of August 2020, a passenger train collided with debris washed onto the track near Carmont in Aberdeenshire following heavy rainfall. The subsequent derailment resulted in the death of 3 people, injuries to the 6 other people in the train, and catastrophic damage. Yeah, absolutely. So there's a bit kind of this first page is just kind of talking about RAIB's role, what they're for. There's the background, obviously, which talks about the location and it talks about the who had built the railway. We don't need to. This isn't stuff we need to know. It talks about the curvy alignment and it kind of talks about the geometry as well. So kind of it is worth saying that basically there's a, and you can see it in the picture here. Hopefully this is nice and clear for everyone. So you can see there's a left-hand curve here, and then it goes through it. There's a reverse curve. It goes through and it transitions out. And I think by the time you reach the other side of the bridge, it's got a regular curvature of 800 meters, radius of 800 meters. Sorry, not curvature, a radius of 800 meters. But that means that from this point, which is essentially there's an infinite point of straight track, and then it gets gradually, the radius gradually reduces and reduces and reduces. So, so that means that the derailment happened at a bit of track that was shallower than 800. A radius of 800 meters. 800 meters is quite tight, but it was actually happening, I think, around about maybe 1600 meters radius because of where it was in the transition. I checked. I got the geometry up actually and looked at this and sort of plotted out in BRT and to kind of look at where the radius, there's the point of derailment measured from the. Yeah, so I could have a look at that and understand. That's how I came up with the lateral acceleration figure, the uncompensated cant efficiency earlier. If you want to know what cant efficiency is, you can look that up on on well, you can Google it, but also it's in some of my videos about the permanent way on my channel. So there's discussion of the signalling, discussion of the train involved. We can skip through all this. Kind of a key thing, and this is where, so I've not talked about this because I don't know enough about the way that and I also trust, or sort of I'm making an assumption that any modification, bearing in mind this rolling stock was modified to have to get rid of the slam doors. I don't know whether it's plug or no, I don't think it is plug doors. I think it's sliding doors. But to move to automatic doors. Originally, the slam doors were there. Actually, it probably says in here sliding doors, power sliding doors. Yeah, it's only the Chilton stuff that has plug doors, right? Anyway, so the work was done by Wabtec to correct those, and I have no reason to believe, and the report doesn't suggest at this point that work resulted in a weakening of the body. Kind of the structural, kind of a lot of work had to be done for each coach. A lot of reconstruction work, a lot of new paneling, a lot of welding, a lot of work had to happen to allow those sliding doors to fit. But there's no suggestion in here that work was deficient, and that's what resulted in the worst crashworthiness. That's not being suggested. Certainly is not being suggested yet. And even if it was, it would not be a liability placement. It would just be stating that the crashworthiness appears to have been compromised. But I don't think they'll say that, because that would be. I think it'd be difficult for them to actually get the evidence to suggest that, to be honest. So there's no suggestion of that being the case here. But they do describe the work. The work was being done between 2017 and 2020 by Wabtec in Doncaster and Carmont to kind of upgrade these trains. So they got rid of the old slam doors and kind of generally brought them into a state of looking like modern rolling stock, even if it's not modern rolling stock. There's a diagram showing where the accident is, north of Carmont signal box, a picture of the train. Discussion of the fact that you had the driver, the conductor of the train, and 6 passengers, and then another conductor travelling to join another train, and then the fact that the driver, train's conductor, and a passenger suffered fatal injuries. So it's kind of opening with that, so that you understand the severity of the incident. Discussion of the organisations involved. So kind of all that stuff, this is the stuff that we don't need to pay huge attention to. What is interesting is where we start getting to the conditions. So we don't need to worry about the organisations involved. Or maybe we do, because, so there's a discussion of the organisation involved in rebuilding the drainage system, which we'll get to the drainage system, which is what failed onto the track shortly. So the weather conditions. So there were bands of heavy, locally intense rainfall on the day before, moving across southern Scotland. Kind of little rain in eastern coastal areas between Dundee and Aberdeen, but by late in the evening, heavy rail was falling over the line, over the area, but it was actually remaining dry all day except for light rainfall in Carmont. But then, at around 5 a.m, the rain started falling. Actually nearly 6 a.m, there was very continuous heavy rain for 3 hours. By the time it was 9 a.m, it was dry and sunny again. So this very short, sharp, intense rainfall happened. Nearly 52 millimetres of rain fell at the accident site, which is 75% of the total monthly rainfall for Aberdeenshire in an average August. So it's a substantial, that's a day, that's 3 hours, a month, that's 3 weeks of rainfall falling in 3 hours. So that's a pretty intense bit of rainfall there. I think it gives you an idea of scale. Jordan Jack is also saying that is signed off on this route, so can add anything. Yeah, Jordan, I don't know how much I have to. You might be able to interject with useful stuff. I think people might be able to query things that you experience on this, and correct me if I get anything wrong as well. Make sure to at me in and correct me. Yes. So let's look at this. So you can see the heavy rainfall moving up, and you can see it moving up. You can see Carmont, and then you can see kind of the evening, and then this. So that's the evening of the rainfall not coming anywhere near Carmont. Then the rainfall coming up, and then you can see between 0500 it's starting to rain. 0600 very heavy rainfall. This kind of extreme patch. And you can see that it's moved from one side of Carmont across the other. So very extreme rainfall. By the time you get to 9:30, it's entirely cleared. That rainfall is gone. So the next critical thing is, here's a picture of the conditions at a road near Carmont an hour before the derailment. Okay, this is quite pixely, but that to me looks like it's pretty saturated. It looks like it's actually got standing water on it. So the cutting on... So this is now a description of this drainage system that was... There's a history of so some drainage was installed. Actually, if I... if I get my slides back, the drainage essentially is you can see my mouse, can't you? So the drainage was installed up here. There's a drainage run installed coming off the top of the slope, the crest of the slope here, and then bringing the drainage down, and then I think running down here into kind of the water, Carron water down here. Yes. So, yeah, I was going to say, there's discussion about the works going on. Yeah, so all the work going on the vehicle. I dare say that my guess is that the vehicle ended up probably in better state than when it arrived in terms of overall crashworthiness, because it would have had to be for them to sign it off. But we'll see. Anyway, that's probably it's a more detailed, complicated investigation, which I don't think we'll see in detail until the final report. So that cutting I've just shown you had a history of landslips and rockfalls. There's one in 1915 which caused a train to derail in a cutting south of where the 2020 crash was. There was a clay pipe drain had been installed along the cutting crest to intercept water flowing. There's a big hill above the line that kind of gently slopes down, and then before it reaches the more steep cutting, and there's a crest drain at the end of where that change from shallow to steep kind of gradient is. And so this new crest drain was installed. So the kind of detail in the crest drain, I'm not going to go into, time is a bit of an enemy here, but you can sort of see that there's a description here in paragraph 23 of the shape of that crest drain and where it is. And there's a good diagram here explaining. You can see with the contour lines, you can see the shallow contour lines there, and you can see where they steepen up dramatically on the approach you can see where the cutting is. So you see this crest drain, which is very gently sloping. CP16 refers to a catch pit, so that's where a catch pit is where you generally break a drain and you have a gap underneath which water builds up, slows the flow, particularly outside of storm events, and that means you get muck settling there, so the stuff that gets washed into the drain drops in the catch pit, is caught by the catch pit, and you can essentially take the lid off, scoop that stuff out, maintain the drainage, put the lid back on, happy days. And so you can see catch pit 16 and then 18 and 19 there. So you can see there's this crest drain then so a crest drain is a drain. Well, there's a diagram here showing, kind of showing what so the crest drain there is on the crest. So it's generally on a kind of on a high point rather than a low point. And you can then see it drops next to the railway, and then there's actually an outfall, which I think then falls into this kind of broader open channel. Which drops down. I don't know if that's described. Crest drain. 340 meter crest drain comprised, half meter diameter, kind of 450 mil diameter in a pipe in a gravel-filled trench. It's a French drain, that is, kind of pretty standard design. So then the gravel-filled trench collected. Drain sloped gently towards outflows along the edge of the field. As the cutting depth began to reduce, the drain followed the crest, and at the northwest end of the cutting sloped relatively steeply to track level, and then I think it says a little above track level the crest drain reaches a catch pit, and then it changes direction and flows towards catch pit 19 adjacent to the railway beyond catch pit 19, so that's this point here. So there's the change in direction between 18 and 19 towards the railway. At catch pit 19, the drain runs parallel to the railway for a short distance until it reaches an outfall into a ditch at track level. So you can see that if I get this picture up, you can see the ditch. So the crest drain runs down here, and then it runs along the railway here, and then it comes into this drain, this kind of drain here, and this ditch here then runs out into Carron water. I think, is that clear to everyone? Hopefully, yes. So. Yes, Kentish Railways points out there were delays on ScotRail Mark 3 work due to the more than work expected. Kind of any old vehicle that you pick apart and try and repurpose. I'm thinking of that. Probably the classic example is the Nimrod airframe based MRA2 sort of RAF vehicles that were being done by BAE, and essentially the project was just cut as part of a spending review back in 2012, was it? And there's those famous pictures of the diggers just chopping up those airframes. But each airframe was unique. One of my colleagues actually currently used to work on those. He actually worked on Hawks, and it was the same story, but the massive refurbishment of these aircraft. Every aircraft was different by multiple inches. And I bet it was the same on the Mark 3s. Construction, kind of... manufacturing, what is it? I've completely lost the word. The production lines were not as precise as they are now, shall we say. So here we are. So that's a description of the drain and kind of an explanation of where that drain is. This is important. And you can sort of see that there's the surface flow, the water percolating through the soil. There's a French drain, so you've got the gravel trench here, and then you've got the pipe with the perforations at the top, and it runs through. And then on the upslope side, you've got the permeable membrane to kind of support the kind of help supporting. If you get a bit of run over, it stops the drain from being exposed or the earth being washed away on either side. So that's kind of, drainage is very important, folks. Ella, the developer, says, I think Chilton's plug doors are all unique. Yeah, I can believe it. Yeah. So, so that drainage system was completed in 2012, but only the section closest to the track. So from catch pit 18 to the outfall. So this bit, just this little bit here, just this short section here, that's the only section which was listed on Network Rail's drain maintenance database at the time of the accident. RAIB has found no evidence that the drain upslope of catch pit 18 was inspected between its construction and the accident. This is already, we are starting to see bad things here. The idea of a part of the railway asset that is just utterly forgotten about from bad record keeping. So on the 13th of May 2020, so this is 6 months before, 2 members of Network Rail staff based at Perth Depot carried out a drainage inspection in the Carmont area using a handheld computer loaded with information from the drain maintenance database, therefore not including the crest drain. They inspected the drain downslope of catch pit 18 and did not observe any faults. They did not climb further up the steep gorse-covered slope to seek additional catch pits. We can't. It's not on them there necessarily. You potentially say they could have been more curious, but actually, I've been in the condition where I'm inspecting drainage, in the situation where I'm inspecting drainage, and it is hard work, and it's a real problem. And you try and get as much desktop information as you can. So I can understand the situation where you're kind of looking at doing a visual inspection to see if there's any obvious material reaching that. That is what it is. So earthworks inspections. So there's an inspection of kind of the area of cutting, that kind of the section of cutting in the area where the washout was examined in June of the year of the derailment, and the inspection resulted in the slope being assigned a low to medium likelihood of failure, which is that's basically as good as it gets, I think, when it comes to GB earthworks. It's assigned an earthworks category, hazard category of C on a scale of A to E, so it's kind of middling, actually. The examiner found no serious issues, such as water flowing over the top of the cutting. Previous examination report recorded drain flowing freely based on the examiner seeing water flowing from the outfall at track level, so flowing from that outfall into the kind of the natural drain going away from the railway that we saw earlier. So that's that. So the track inspection. So let's have a look at what the track. So there was the section of track where the derailment occurred had a planned inspection, which was undertaken overnight. So on the night before the derailment, actually on the 11th to 12th, by an infrastructure technician and a driver travelling slowly in a road rail vehicle. The inspection report stated that no actionable defects were found in the area of the accident. A track recording vehicle measured the track geometry through this area on the 21st of July 2020 and identified no faults. So one of the yellow trains went through and everything was fine. So it wasn't a specific track failure that was. So this is them kind of doing it's pretty obvious what's caused the derailment, but they're doing due diligence to ensure that actually there wasn't, we're not missing something else happening. Maybe there was an underlying failure, but no, they're just pointing out that the track geometry appears to suggest that everything was fine. And there are some scour protection works at the base of the bridge, actually, that the train travelled over. So actually, interestingly, there was a construction team doing work at the time of the derailment. They actually ran out the way as the train came through, and I think that gets discussed earlier. So let's have a look at this. So we're getting towards the sequence of events now. So I'm gonna have another drink of water, sorry, because my throat's going. I do have a bit of a cold at the moment. So there was heavy rainfall on the night, as we've talked about, and it caused considerable damage to the railway across. There were major bits of railway closed already. So by 7 a.m, the only major route in the central and eastern parts of the country which remained unaffected was Inverness, Aberdeen, Dundee. So already the central belt was in chaos. There were lots of problems. There were flooding, landslips, multiple failures. This is really important. They're trying to set the scene here. ScotRail, the Scotland's railway team, so Network Rail and ScotRail in combination, were already in crisis mode. Lots of problems. There'd been the canal had burst its banks and closed the Edinburgh Glasgow line near Polmont. There were kind of There's an incident at a caravan park alongside the railway at Burnt Island that was causing issues in Fife. There were just lots of issues. I think that there's a diagram in a minute that shows it. So on the morning of the derailment, so the 12th of August, the first two southbound departures from Aberdeen left on time, passed through the Carmont area without incident. That was trains 2B12 and 2B12, 2 Bravo 12, and 1 Tango 06, which was redesignated as 5 Tango 06 as it ran without carrying passengers. So 5 Tango 06 ran to Dundee and was not expected to continue to Glasgow Queen Street, which is where it was supposed to be going. The 5:46 train from Aberdeen to Edinburgh, train 1 Bravo 07, was cancelled with railway records showing that this was because of heavy rain flooding the railway. So the next departure was train 2 Bravo 14, the 6:19 service to Montrose, which ran normally to its destination. So the train involved in the accident, which is 1 Tango 08, was the 6:38 hours service, timetable to run from Aberdeen to Glasgow Queen Street. Because of the weather-related problems south of Dundee, the train was expected to terminate at Dundee on the day of the accident. So the train departed from Aberdeen on time. It called at Stonehaven at 6:53, and it passed Carmont signal box. So it was beyond the area of the accident, south of the signal box, when it was stopped by a railway emergency call made by the signaller using GSMR, which is the on-train radio system that's kind of fantastically useful, actually really valuable, powerful tool compared to past times. So that was in response to a report of a landslip, which is going to get covered in a couple of paragraphs. The train stopped before that landslip, which was just north of Arnie's Bridge, which is quite a bit further, quite a way south of Carmont, and it subsequently returned northwards. Because railway emergency calls are relayed to route control, the signaller's call also informed the route control manager about the Arnie's Bridge landslip. So there you go. So this is a nice map showing all of these incidents kicking off all at once. Lots of problems going on, lots of issues, lots of issues being managed by the team, the kind of the crisis management team, as well as everyone trying to keep things as close to business as usual as possible. So the first northbound train of the day to pass the accident site was train 1 Hotel 25, the 5:39 from Dundee to Inverness. Train passed Carmont at 6:46, encountered floodwater at Newton Hill, which was about 20 kilometres north of Carmont. Driver made a railway emergency call to the Aberdeen signaller using GSMR. The railway was closed at Newton Hill until the situation could be assessed by Network Rail staff on the ground. It continued to Aberdeen. So the next northbound train was Montrose Inverurie, 2 Bravo 13. I'm going to stop using train reporting numbers because I don't think it's that useful, particularly in audio form, but I don't think it's that useful. So there's another northbound train, the Montrose Inverurie train via Aberdeen. That train, travelling on the downline, stopped adjacent to Carmont signal box. The driver reported to the signaller that he had seen a landslip affecting the upline at a location he identified as Blackbridge, but that was subsequently found to be a short distance away at Arnie's Bridge. So we already know about Arnie's Bridge from the southbound trains, right? So they're kind of a couple of kilometres south of Carmont signal box. The signaller informed the driver of so remember our train that we're worrying about is 1 Tango 08. The signaller informed the driver of the train 1 Tango 08 about this landslip, making the emergency call. The driver train 2 Bravo 13 reported the landslip to Carmont signaller. That one kept going northwards towards Aberdeen, past the accident site at 7 hours. 0707 before reaching Stonehaven at 7:13. It couldn't go any further because of the fact that the railway had been closed north of Stonehaven at Newton Hill. So that train was paused. The driver saw nothing unusual at the accident site, so the slip hadn't happened at that point. So the Network Rail person arrived at Blackbridge, and the signaller provided them with protection from train movements. So they were protected by so they had a line block presumably by signals. The staff member went to investigate the landslip, which had been reported. He couldn't find the problem at that location, walked north and found the landslide blocking the upline 550 metres away at Arnie's Bridge, not Blackbridge. And he could see 1 Tango 08 stationary a bit further north, having stopped so that train had stopped at Arnie's Bridge. He also found flooding affected the downline in the vicinity of Arnie's Bridge and reported this to Lawrence Kirk signaller, who's there further south, who informed route control at 8:50. So the local signaller was able to basically signal protect this person doing their inspection. So to the south of this bridge where there'd been a problem, the service from Perth to Inverurie, another train, had been held at Lawrence Kirk Station because of the flooding. at Newton Hill. So actually the flooding further north of Stonehaven had paused that train to avoid them kind of getting all clogged up. Yeah, this is to avoid the risk of stranding the train and its passengers in a remote location because of the station being occupied. That makes good sense. It's good practice to stop trains where people can get off the train, if possible. At 8:28 hours, the driver of that train was advised by route control via the Lawrence Kirk signaller. The driver of that train, that because of route blockages further north, the train was to be terminated at Lawrence Kirk. The train was redesignated, crossed to the other line, and then departed southwards from Lawrence Kirk station. Okay, so far everything sort of seems okay. It's crisis mode, but everything seems fairly sensible. So let me just remind myself where we are. So after travelling about 730 metres, the driver of that train stopped on seeing a landslip ahead. So let me see. So this is. I've got to make sure I get my. So this is driver 1Z43. So they're So they're heading. This is where it's fiddly. You've got to kind of get heads and make sure that you've got it right of what trains are going where. So that train was going. That train was going northwards. Has now turned into a southbound train. So that's heading southwards from Lawrence Kirk, and it's now stopped at another failure. So that train, which was kind of redesignated, stopped at seeing a landslide further south of Lawrence Kirk. The driver informed Lawrence Kirk signaller who passed this information and the information about the Ironies landslip to route control at 8:50. This meant that route control staff were now aware of 2 landslips and 2 flooding events in that section between Lawrence Kirk and Newton Hill, in addition to all the chaos going on elsewhere. So this is already 2 train blocking landslides, trapping a load of trains on this bit of railway line. So you can see that there are problems occurring. And given all these, this is the point where you realise that, okay, there was a landslide, but this is starting to look, there are already starting to be issues here. There's already a bit of there's a lot of chaos happening in a very small space of railway, a very restricted railway. Lots of sections of single track. You can't just pass trains past each other. There's a lot that the signallers are having to think about to make sure they don't just trap trains, deadlock trains, so they can't. There are lots of things they're having to think about. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. So at this point, we can see the situation. You've got a train here being held. Due to one train being held due to the landslip. You've got the train that the Carmont derailment train being held south of the current derailment point at Carmont signal box. You've got 2 Bravo 13 being held due to flooding at Stonehaven, facing northwards. So you've got a train heading facing southwards, further south. You've got the train in question facing southwards at the moment. And then you've got 2 Bravo 13 facing northwards. All of these trapped by 3 different weather events trapping these trains in place, but 2 landslides within our bit of railway here. Is everyone following? Is this all? I don't know to what extent this is useful. Ella, the developers, asked what scour protection is. Scour protection is where you ensure that a river or a stream is not washing away the foundations of a bridge. So whether it's the kind of the pier in the middle, or intermediate piers, or the abutments, making sure that your structure is not getting undermined by water flow. Sorry, brief digression. So as train 1 Tango 08, so our train was unable to proceed south beyond Ironies Bridge, as we've established. There was a concern about passengers being stranded. Rightly so. A member of route control staff called the Carmont signaller and asked them to arrange with the signaller at Stonehaven for this train, the 1 Tango 08, our train, to return to Stonehaven. This movement involved the train crossing from the up line to the down line at Carmont, because there's a crossover next to the signal box there. So moving over that crossover, let's see. So there's some, because this crossover wasn't equipped with facing point locks, which secures points in position. So it needed to be. So the rule book required that it got clamped and scotched before the train could kind of pass through it. So the Network Rail mobile operations manager, the MOM, was tasked with travelling to Carmont to do that. So the MOM arrived at 8:55. By 9:17, the necessary clamps and scotches had been fit to the crossovers. So this meant that so there's a train the train at Stonehaven had been all the passengers were being prepared to get off there so that train could move out of the platform to make room for 1 Tango 08. Okay, so they basically got all the passengers off 2 Bravo 13, which was the one facing northwards, stuck at Stonehaven, so they could just basically trundle it out of the way, just run up to the next signal, but without stranding passengers. So the passengers were all kind of at Stonehaven being taken somewhere, presumably not great numbers at this point, being taken somewhere safe. So that, with the logic that our train could then pull into Stonehaven at the platform and passengers could get off. So by 9:29, the heavy rain had stopped and the sun was shining at Carmont signal box. So, not that I want to kind of try to put your mind in those circumstances. It feels like okay, some arrangements have been made. So that train okay? We've kind of made those arrangements. We've had these landslips. We've identified multiple issues already. But we've kind of got the arrangements ready to send that train up, get those passengers off warm and safe, if needs be. Okay, so let's basically. Okay, so right, the weather's improving. Right, okay, maybe we're going to get this crisis. Maybe it's going to be moved through. So, and it's worth. I know we're going through time, but I think it's worth looking at this in detail, because the sequence of events is critical. I think it's important to understand the operational reasons why things were happening. So at 9:29, the Carmont signaller used GSMR to speak to the driver of train 1 Tango 08, our train, standing between the signal box and Arnie's Bridge. The signaller authorised the train to return north on the up line as far as Carmont, so that's kind of a wrong side move. But the signaller has authorised it, it's protected as such, so the signaller knows what's going on. Traverse the crossover, then proceed towards Stonehaven on the down line. So on the correct line for going northwards, having gone over the crossover. The signaller advised the driver to traverse the crossover at 5 miles per hour and said that everything was then fine to Stonehaven, so the train could run at normal speed to there. I think that's a key moment in the situation. Is that in reality the driver, the signaller, We'll move on to the discussion of whether that was the right advice, whether the driver should still be moving at caution. We've got a driver, Jordan's here. Jordan, what's your perception of that? Is your perception? What does the rule book say? Should, given the circumstances there, is it? And this is not pointing any right or wrong at Brett McCulloch, the driver. By the way, this is merely what happened is sort of laid out in front. This is not a blame situation, and the issue is more, what are the things? What is the rulebook saying? What is your perception in that situation? So, Jordan, I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are about that situation. So let's see. So, and there's lots of good discussion going on in there. I see. Chris Jackson's wondering why there wasn't a set of clamps kept in Carmont box in case of need, rather than wait to the monorail. Yeah, that's not an unreasonable question. Actually, I don't know. I don't know. So, as the signaller was not aware of any obstruction of the line, railway rules did not require him to instruct the driver to travel at a speed slower than the maximum normally permitted. If aware of a possible obstruction or other potential problem, a signaller should instruct a driver to proceed at caution at a speed which will allow the train to be stopped short of any obstruction. So, it is what it is. This is not a should they, shouldn't they. That's the situation. This is what happened. The driver then asked the signaller whether train 1 Tango 08 would be held at Stonehaven. The signaller confirmed that this was the case because the line was blocked beyond Stonehaven. The signaller gave the driver permission to make the move over the crossover. The driver repeated back the instruction to confirm he's understood it. Yes, I know I'm reading out the report, but hopefully I'm perhaps annotating in a way that makes it additionally useful other than just reading it. So the train moves through the crossover at very low speed. Once the driver is through the crossover, aware that the train's through the crossover, the speed increase. The driver increased the speed towards the maximum permissible speed, which was 75 miles an hour for this bit of line. And so the driver is accelerating at this point. So now we reach kind of the process of the derailment. So again, I just want to say this is potentially upsetting for people, but I think if you're still with us at this point, then I'll press on. So in the area of Bridge 325, which is the bridge in question, north of Carmont, heavy rain between 5:50 hours and 0900 hours on the morning of kind of in question resulted in gravel from this crest drain we've been talking about, together with stones and soil eroded from the surrounding ground. They got washed out onto the track. So this debris covered the downline just short of the bridge, and the precise time in which this occurred is not known, but it must have been between 7:07 hours, when the last train before the accident passed the location, until the arrival of the train at about 9:37 hours. So that's 2.5 hours window, a 2.5 hour window for this to have happened. Data from the on-train data recorder, the black box, if you like, fitted to the trailing power car, shows that the train was travelling at about 73 miles an hour, which was less than the maximum permitted speed, as it approached the washout debris. Bear in mind, the driver at this point has no reason to... Okay, they're aware that there are issues, but broadly, if they've been instructed by the signal that the line is clear and unobstructed, absolutely right to take that on good faith. And there's no reason, they're on the right side of the railway, they're driving the train, everything is essentially normal between ahead of them up to Stonehaven. They're aware of the train movements, the signal is already discussed with them. There's no reason to not be following the rules of the rules in front of them. Let me see. So let's have a look. Roaming Adcrat points out signallers don't have PTS, so personal track safety certification, routinely, so they can't clamp points themselves, so the MOM would have to arrive anyway. That's a fairly good description. And actually, if the MOM, then it means that the MOM is always aware that their kit is maintained, whereas if it's in the signal box and not used for 20 years, then it's not unreliable. Yeah, so... Jordan Jack, So Jordan Jack is just adding, I think, reading out what Jordan said. So in normal circumstances, we proceed at line speed unless we're instructed otherwise. Considering this situation, Brett was instructed to proceed. Sun was out. Signaller did not indicate there was a reason to proceed at caution, so he proceeded as instructed. It's a difficult situation because the sun was out at this point. Other trains had passed with no issue. Absolutely. I think it's important to get in the psychology. The crisis at this point, the combination of the fact that the instructions about, right, you're going to pull into Stonehaven where we'll sort the situation out, the sun coming out, which feels like the issue is drawn to a close. There's a general feeling that everything's towards the end of the crisis locally, that the situation's been resolved. I would, to my mind, pretty reasonable as a driver to then expect, they've kind of resolved these issues. Let's get let's get these passengers back where we need to. Like, if I dither around, I'm exasperating some of the issues, other challenges. So let's get the passengers back to Stonehaven where they can. I'm taking them the wrong direction already anyway. Their well-being is important to me as a driver. I can imagine that's the sort of things going through into your head. Jordan Jackson essentially worked to instruction. Yeah, having been in the cab, I've been in an HST cab actually, and having been in the cab, going down to Doncaster and back up, it's abundantly clear to me. And it's not like drivers are entirely. It's not like drivers are powerless. That's not what I'm saying. But it's abundantly clear to me that there is a bond of trust between driver, signaller, and infrastructure. With all the people that means. There is an absolute accepted bond of trust that exists there. And my first thing that I experienced sat in the cab of a train was a Class 158 heading straight towards me and then diverting on a crossover into the platform next to me in York. And that immediately, from that, I realised that trust immediately. And then the driver, the fantastic driver, LNER driver, had explained to me as I was going south that this is the point where if I don't apply an emergency brake, we're straddling Colton Junction in the wrong direction if it's been set incorrectly. This is the point. And I couldn't see Colton Junction. We were miles, a couple of miles from it. For me, that was something that... So there is that bond of trust is... And I have to say, with the bridge parapet failure and with issues happening elsewhere, I think that bond of trust has been shaken a little bit on this line of late. Anyway, sorry. I think it's interesting and important to kind of make that point. Jordan, thanks so much for kind of that discussion. Really, really valuable insights there. So let's have a look. So let me now read this through. So the train is travelling at 75 miles an hour as it approached the washout debris. The left-hand curve on the approach obstructed the driver's view of the debris until the train was about 120 metres from it. The train covered this distance in less than 4 seconds. It's 120 metres, 4 seconds. Although the on-train data recorder records an application of the emergency brake, there was insufficient time for this to have had any significant effect on the train's speed before it struck the debris. It's worth saying that the brake applications, and again, Jordan can infinitely more knowledgeable than me about this. A brake application, particularly at high speeds, it's a bit of time before you're getting an effect. The momentum takes a little bit of time to drop away. So things don't go well from this point. So the leading power car struck the debris. So it struck the debris basically at 73 miles an hour. Derailed to the left. Its leading end progressively deviated towards the cess, so that's the kind of this to the side of the track as the track curved to the right, and it continued running derailed for around 60 meters until it struck a section of bridge parapet. After destroying more than half of the parapet, the power car fell off the bridge and down onto a wooded embankment below, and the driver's cab became detached on impact with the ground. 3 of the following 5 vehicles travelled in different directions beyond the bridge. So there's a figure which will explain this. The first passenger coach came to rest on its roof, almost at right angles to the track. The second passenger coach came to rest overturned onto its roof with its trailing end on the top of the first coach. So the coach that we've seen already in images squashed flat and almost perpendicular to the track was the first coach. Second coach came to rest upside down with its trailing end on top of the first coach and facing the direction of travel. The third passenger coach ran down the steep embankment to the left side of the railway and came to rest on its right-hand side. The fourth passenger coach, the trailing coach, the last coach, remained upright and came to rest with its leading end on top of the first coach. The trailing power car remained upright on the down line, still coupled to the rear of the fourth coach. And the behaviour of the train and the derailment and the damage it sustained are described in more detail in about 10 or 20 paragraphs. So, we'll obviously go through that. So, what happened next? You know, the response to an incident is absolutely critical to how quickly you can get in there and start looking after people, helping people who are injured or worse. So I'm going to pause here after that description. Ella developer, the short HSTs have slightly strange brakes. I'm not sure about that, to be honest, Ella. I don't know, actually. Josh Light's Call is asking about eddy current braking for emergency braking. Possibly, but not. It would have made no. Given the speeds involved, that still would have made no difference to the. I don't think it would have made any difference to the rate of deceleration, to be honest. So I often hear people criticise the principle of route familiarisation, but I think what Gareth Dennis just said about emergency brakes proves how essential it is. Absolutely, energy dissipated scales with the scale of speed. So yeah. Also, the untrained data recorders have accelerometers to work out what happens in situations like this. I don't think they do. Romy Adcock's absolutely right. There's no braking at this point when you've got 120 meters at 73 miles an hour. Very little time for brakes to make any difference. The speed drop happens at the end of a braking cycle, not in the early parts where you'd lose very little. Not necessarily. Ella, you're right. Eddy current braking can actually just wreck up the track. So here we are. So let's have a look. So the first moment, James P is just making my case, but worded better, which is about energy dissipated, which scales with the square of the speed. So brakes generally scrub energy at a constant rate. So a constant rate of energy scrubbing, energy dissipation, which means that the first moments see the least velocity loss. Thank you, James P. You put that very well. And Jordan Jack, again, this is going to be very insightful. So there's a delay to brake application. If Brett saw the obstruction and immediately applied the emergency brake, I wouldn't be sure any meaningful brake force would be applied yet. Michael C. Does the fact that there are multiple landslips suggest a lack of adequate maintenance on the whole line? Any one of these landslips could have been a disaster if undetected. Yeah, that's something we're going to come to, I think. I don't want to cast aspersions again on the... Network Rail is always resource stripped. I don't want to cast aspersions on the route asset manager at the time, the Earthworks asset manager. So I don't want to cast that sort of a claim. But, given that I don't think it's unreasonable to suggest that potentially this line has not had enough maintenance, given the fact that you had a parapet failure more recently on a bridge further, just the next bridge up from this bridge, I think Bridge 326. So, Jordan Jack saying HST on train, the black box in an HST is not as good as modern trains, not as detailed. So it sounds like modern trains do have that sort of information, but the old ones don't. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. Events after the accident. So this has happened, and we're going to get more detail on the behaviour of the train in a moment, but the contractors working on the scar protection project had a small team on site to protect plant and equipment from rising water levels, because they were looking at what was happening with the stream, the Carmont water. 2 people were standing by the river when they heard, and this is a quote, a loud rumbling noise from above, and ran as the derailed vehicles fell down the embankment. I mean, bloody hell. The contractor's supervisor made a 999 call about 9:37. That will have been... I have no doubt that the contractors will have been called... They'll have been running out the way, and I doubt they'll have stood for very long before getting their phones out. They'll have been shock. They'll have been trauma of seeing what they just witnessed. But I think the best of us is when, you know, I'd be willing to say that a lot of people, the industry I know, the people I work in the railway that I know, and also all evidence of what happens generally on the railway in previous instances, that people react very quickly. People are very good at reacting well in a crisis. Very few people don't respond well in a crisis. You can go through all the crash reports. I've read hundreds of crash reports. Certainly, you know, literally hundreds. Actually, I know the numbers from my thesis, which I read 160 from my thesis, and I've read more since. And people respond well in a crisis as a rule. I don't think that's an unreasonable rule to make. I don't think it's a stretch. People respond well in a crisis. We're already at 2050, by the way. I'm sorry this is going on long, but I think it's important. So I imagine that the incident will have happened, you know, 30 seconds, a minute before, and very little. So 9:37 is when it would have happened. Police Scotland, 9:43, Police Scotland advised route control of a report of a train off the track. So 6 minutes later, so presumably they'll have collected the information from the call, and then they'll have collected all the information they need. They'll have then reported it through to route control. This message was passed to the signaller at Stonehaven, who in turn called the Carmont signaller at 9:48. So 10 minutes later, signaller stopped all further train movements, and Network Rail staff, including the mom who had been at Carmont signal box, reached the site of the accident at approximately 9:55. So was about a quarter of an hour later, not a long time later. The emergency services started, maybe a little long, that's nearly 20 minutes. The emergency services started to arrive about 10:15, so that's half an hour later the emergency services arrived. It's 10:15, so a conductor who had been travelling to Dundee as a passenger on the train phoned Carmont signal box from a line-side telephone, having walked down the line from the site of the accident. So this is the only staff member on that train who had survived the derailment, by the way. What they were doing was immediately going to protect the train to the best of their ability. They were making their way to protect what was left of the train, which I think is always worth noting. So this diagram sort of shows the behaviour, you know, where the pieces of the train end up. But I think I've explained that already. The scour protection contractor's staff provided initial assistance to the injured people on the train. They also used a small excavator that was on site to move a portable fuel tank away from the scene, to put water on one of the fires, and place a timber mat across the river to make a temporary bridge. So already I think absolute credit to the staff who are just on site, just chaps on site just doing physical work on the railway. You know, they were using an excavator to put. So they put water on one of the fires. They were putting out the fires. They were placing a timber mat to allow people to get access more easily immediately. Local residents were responding and providing assistance to injured people in the emergency service. During the first few hours after the derailment, the emergency services established their presence on site, removed the injured people to hospital, and extinguished the fire in Coach B. So the next bit I'm going to skip over because it's just really a description of the RAIB investigation, the challenges. I will kind of keep my eye on it just in case there is anything. So there's a description of how long it took to take the last vehicles off. That happened in mid to late September, which is it's quite a long time after the derailment, in honesty. And then it took another. It was then November before the line was reopened, and the new drainage had been installed before that, rightly so, to make the railway safe, the infrastructure safe. So the immediate cause of the derailment is the fact the train derailed after colliding with stones washed onto the track from the gravel-filled crash drain. That's understood. Post-accident service of the track found no evidence suggesting the derailment occurred on the approach to the debris on the track, and verified pre-accident inspections which had found no track defects in the area. Yep, so basically the RAB has not found any evidence of a train fault that could have played a part in this derailment. So track and train, track specifically and train, were not the reason for this derailment. The first evidence that the train wheels had deviated from the rails was identified less than 1 metre beyond the point where the left-hand rail emerged from beneath the debris. The top surface of the rail was scored by the flange of the leading left-hand wheel, so that's the sort of, the thin part of the wheel, as the kind of the curve of the wheel shape. And there we are. So the first evidence that, so Ella, could they get onto the rear cab and use the big red button which stops everything in the cab? I don't know whether maybe they did do that, but I think I think that might well have happened anyway, and the conductor was basically doing due diligence to just go and do everything they could to protect the train. I presume it might well be that the contractors ran up. They had a discussion. The contractor said, "Look, you know," or I don't know what that course of action is, but I would assume that would have been kind of done already, or it might have been an assumption that was too risky because of the lack of potential signal from GSM in this particular spot, the risk of it being a blind spot. I don't know, but going along the track to phone the signaler feels, I can understand why that, the severity was, and also they couldn't, pressing the red button is a delay to the emergency services arriving, because that's just a red button. It doesn't say anything about what's happened. So I think maybe they just went as quickly as they could. I don't exactly know what happened there, but that might well be made clear in the final investigation after they've got testimony of the people who survived the incident. So the washout was caused by the unusually heavy rain, which washed out the gravel and so on. And so surface water. So basically, they're saying that, leave it. So that this gravel-filled crest drain, the gravel was washed up out of there. So the local ground topographer directed large amounts of surface water onto the steeply sloping drain in the area from which the gravel was washed out. So it's not the gravel in the shallow crest drain. It's more that steep section. The water was being channeled from on the hill. All the water was being channeled into that point, and actually the speed of water, the flow of water, washed out the crest drain being applied on a steeper slope, perhaps where it shouldn't be. I don't know, perhaps where it shouldn't have been. The colour and shape of the drain fill, as evidenced by the gravel remaining in the drain, differed from stones naturally occurring in the surrounding area and represented a significant proportion of the debris on track. Excuse me. So you can see here, there's the drain with the gravel washed out. So let's zoom in on that a bit. So you can see here, this is the crest drain. The gravel is just entirely washed out. It's just gone. You can see absence of gravel that's been washed from the trench, presence of locally occurring natural stones washed from the ground around the trench. So these stones have been washed into this trench. And you can see here that there's the exposed plastic kind of perforated drainage pipe, and you can see all the specifically gravel. It's almost ballast coloured. That's the material that's been washed out of that drain. It's possible that surface water flows before the day of the accident had been sufficient to dislodge gravel from small areas of the gravel-filled drain, sufficient to be seen in the area affected, but with insufficient material washed down for this to be apparent at track level. The lack of an effective drainage inspection regime meant that any such indications of future problems upslope of catch pit 18, so upslope of the bit that had been looked at, that was parallel to the track, would not have been detected. Right. This bit is, I'm kind of acutely conscious of, it is important that we go through this time-wise. I know that people are saying, don't worry about the time, it's important to go through this, it's relevant. This section is about the procedures for managing trains in extreme weather. And actually this gets quite complicated, so I don't think it's worth picking through yourselves, but I'm not going to go through it in great detail. It talks about the areas of the management areas for weather forecast. So there's the areas for weather forecasting. Those relate to hazard management areas. There's a lot of stuff about calling. So there's stuff about the processes by which you could call, whether to call this EWAT, which is an extreme weather action teleconference. So essentially saying that this is serious. There are serious challenges that we need to crisis manage this very carefully. It's unlikely that would have avoided the accident anyway. So it's worth noting, though, that at the time of the accident, Network Rail had no formal procedure requiring an immediate review of operating restrictions after the occurrence of multiple weather-related events. Sorry. I'm coughing down there. I'm doing an Alice and coughing down the mic. Sorry, everyone. It's fine. It adds character, right? I do have a bit of a cough at the moment anyway. I've also had a coronavirus test, so it's not that. So that's critical. There is no formal procedure. So if you've had multiple landslips, there was no procedure existing going, right, we've had multiple landslips. Everything needs to be travelling at caution on this line. That's a problem, actually. It's a mistake, and hopefully it's something we are going to learn. Already we've changed that. That has now been changed, by the way. So this is now, we're going to look at the detail of the derailment. So this is the derailment in more precise detail. Again, this might be uncomfortable listening. When the train struck the washout debris, the leading bogie, the leading power car, derailed to the left side of the track, followed by the trailing bogie within a few metres. The leading bogie progressively drifted towards the cess as it approached the bridge. None of the following vehicles appear to have derailed at the landslip. So the landslip only derailed the power car. Everything else was derailed by the behaviour of the train after that landslide. Basically, the power car had already probably created a flangeway gap for the train to pass over, or the lighter vehicles weren't actually derailed by it. So none of the following vehicles appeared to derail the landslip. By the time the power car reached the bridge, its leading end was displaced so far to the left that it struck the bridge parapet, demolishing it, and as a result, deviating even further to the left of the track. This is why I was talking about derailed vehicle retention earlier. Near the middle of the bridge, the leading power car became detached from the first passenger coach. During the detachment, the first passenger coach climbed over the trailing right-hand side of the power car, which caused substantial structural damage to the vehicle ends involved in this interaction. The power car then fell off the bridge and down onto the embankment below. The leading bogie of the first passenger coach followed the leading power car onto the embankment. The first passenger coach and following vehicles continued over and beyond the bridge. The first three coaches then jackknifed in sequence, each becoming uncoupled from the adjoining vehicles, shedding all of their bogies and rotating in different directions in the horizontal plane. The first passenger coach rotated to the left and came to rest on its roof and almost at right angles to the track. The second coach rotated to the right, ran through some trees and collided with the bank on the cess side of the upline. It then spun round further and came to rest upside down, having rotated almost 180 degrees, so its trailing end was on top of coach D. Yeah. The third coach rotated to the left, ran down the steep embankment and came to rest on its right-hand side at an angle of 130 degrees to the track. The fourth coach continued upright on its bogies until it struck debris from the other vehicles near coach D, and was lifted up and to the left of the track, coming to rest on top of the leading end of coach D. The trailing end of coach A remained coupled to the trailing power car, which stayed upright. So you've seen the pictures. We've already looked at those. The trailing vehicle, the two trailing vehicles, the last coach and the last power car were still connected to each other. So as a result of the derailment and damage to the vehicles, the train. So we've already established the train driver and the conductor in coach D, so that first coach, and a passenger in coach C all suffered fatal injuries. The 6 other occupants of the train suffered injuries, some serious. The leading power car and all 4 passenger coaches suffered substantial damage, with the extent of the damage reducing progressively towards the rear of the train. On the leading power car, the driver's cab became completely detached when the vehicle collided with the bank, and the roof, right-hand body side, trailing end bogies and underframe were substantially damaged. The first passenger coach, coach D, suffered severe damage to the leading vestibule roof and body sides over the leading half of the vehicle, which resulted in significant loss of survival space in that area. That's the kind of the cube shape within a coach that you should have for people to be safe within. That's called survival space. The collapsed roof and body sides also caused substantial disruption to the interior furniture, light fittings and trim panels in that area, but the seats and tables remained attached. Almost all the windows in the leading half of the vehicle were broken through. The second coach sustained damage to the leading vestibule and localised penetration damage to the trailing left-hand side. So this is talking about substantial. You can see the dents in that coach that rolled down the side, most likely as a result of impacts with detached bogies. This is why I'm reading this in detail. It's because it paints the picture of some of the reasons why crashworthiness are important. I hope you don't think it's gratuitous. I think it's important to read it. You can understand why the physics, all this stuff is happening within seconds. So the physics involved, the energy involved is immense. So any objects, any behaviours result in damage, result in huge force being imparted on the vehicles, which is why they should be up to standard to cope with them. We don't have an excuse to really submitting these vehicles, in a derailment. There are lots of ideally we don't have derailment at all, but if we do, we should be protecting people. So penetration of the trailing right-hand side, again, bogie related. 4 windows smashed through. Windows smashing through means the potential to eject passengers, which is very bad. It's absolutely critically a situation to avoid happening. The coach retained its survival space, and the interior furniture remained in place except within a localised area at the trailing end where the seats are being pushed into the aisle by damage to the left-hand body side. Third coach sustained substantial damage to the right-hand body sides. This is the one that rolled over and almost totally rotated itself. Some damage to the leading vestibule. All the windows on the right-hand side and most of those on the left-hand side were broken through. Again, it's probably because it's been compressed and had objects striking it. This is coach... forgive me. Coach C is the one that rotated. Coach B is the one that went down the embankment. Forgive me. All the windows on the right-hand side broke. Yeah, so this coach later caught fire, which resulted in most of the vehicle's interior being burnt. So this happened later. The fourth coach suffered substantial damage to the leading vestibule and localised damage to both body sides, and the leading bogie pivot and underframe equipment were severely damaged. Several windows shattered but not broken through. The interior remained intact, and then the trailing power car did not suffer any significant damage. Evidence from witnesses as well as on-train CCTV shows that the leading power car was visibly on fire immediately after it came to rest. The likely cause of the fire was the spillage of diesel fuel from the ruptured fuel tank. Coach B subsequently caught fire. Witnesses state that Coach B was not visibly on fire until well after the emergency service had arrived. Witness evidence specifically mentions the fire on Coach B as being near the battery compartment. No one was in Coach B at the time of the accident. No one was injured as a result of either fire. So I'm not going to go into... Well, maybe it is worth reassuring people that there have been changes to guidance as a result. Immediately after the accident, there were changes to guidance. Within a week, there have been changes to guidance. So there's quite a lot in there that kind of I think there's detail that explains that. There's some expert review committees too. One about weather and one about climate and one about weather and one about earthworks. The two responses. So this is the bit that is kind of key and interesting to explore. I know this has gone on. I think it was worth going through that explanation. I think. The areas basically, this is the key bit, is the areas being considered by the RAIB. So there are kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different sort of areas they're looking at. The first is the response of the railway to severe weather events and weather-related infrastructure failures. I don't think that requires any further explanation. That's happening, it's ongoing. Hopefully we'll be able to speak to people on future RailNatters about that. The competence and training of operational staff to deal effectively with such events. Yeah, again, same sort of thing. The railway's management systems and decision-making processes at times of widespread disruption caused by severe weather and or multiple instances of infrastructure failure. Again, these are operational. Clearly, lessons need to be learned related to this. I think it can be quite reasonably argued that I think the whole railway, broadly, was too eager to let that train go north without checking that things had gone wrong. I think that's clearly a consequence. What processes resulted in that happening? It's not about personal fault. It's about process problems that result in that being able to happen. I think the reason I tried to describe where people were at in their heads during the situation is because I don't think you can place that blame on individuals. I think that's a process, a system failure. The railway's use of weather data to help it manage events. So yeah, I think that's a key one. Data is our ally in understanding this stuff. Can we have remote condition monitoring where we've got earthworks that are at risk? The drainage system at Carmont. This is obviously has got more bullet points associated with it. So this is looking at the actual behaviour of the drainage system, comparison of whether it was planned to do. So this is critical for permanent way engineers, for civil engineers. Drainage design. This is key. Raising eyebrows about the design of drainage. Do we design drainage properly? The validation and approval of the drain design methodology, design data, design output. So that's key for my fellow consultants. That's the critical output we'll be paying attention to. Hopefully we're already looking inwards and understanding if drainage design is done right, the way in which the drain was constructed, so then the construction of that drain, whether the design was right, was it then built right, and then the intended and actual post-construction inspection process. So having been built, was it checked and inspected appropriately? Well, we've already understood no, it wasn't, because it didn't find its way onto an asset register. So this is then perhaps something that I, having talked about crashworthiness, will be paying particular attention to, and I hope that the RAIB do not pull their punches as they might have done in the past. The causes of the fires. I know there have been some questions about fires. Possible effects of fire on the way in which the windows broke, that's an interesting one. Causes of the injuries sustained by people on the train. So that's always something that's not particular to this instance. That's just always something they do. They understand why each individual injury. They look at why that's happened, because each individual injury, each individual series of injuries that a person has suffered, allows us to learn a lot about where we can make improvements. So it's not it's the crash. This is a key one. Crashworthiness of, well, it says broadly, of rail vehicles in high energy accidents. The performance of devices fitted on trains to displace obstacles on track. Whether more modern obstacle deflectors could have resulted in the train remaining on track and avoiding the incident altogether. Devices to mitigate risk in the event of derailment at high-risk locations. This last one is really about guardrails. That's what that one's talking about. So it's not about the vehicle, but it's about the infrastructure on the track. The next is about climate change, the likely effect of climate change on the type of weather event that caused this accident and its relevance to the future management of railway drainage. That's a big one as well. I know I talked a lot about that in interviews afterwards. It felt like a very obvious issue that the railways, it's not obvious, I'd written already about it. It's an acknowledged issue in the railway that we are increasingly having to deal with these issues. And then some of the underlying management factors, development validation of standards related to risk management, the railway industry's responses to previous recommendations from the RAIB, and general recommendations for the improvement of railway safety. Well, they always generally stick that one in. So that's the report. That is the report right there. And so as I put that picture up and bring OBS back so I can see what I'm doing, I hope that was... there's some questions. So David Shepherd asks, can slopes next to railways be cut back to remove the risk of landslips onto the line? That does happen, but it usually happens... It can happen in advance, but generally you that's a major bit of civil engineering work. It does happen. That does happen. But you'll generally, more often than not, you'll see that after a failure rather than to avoid one. Reactive rather than proactive. So, Owen O'Neill, primary versus secondary measures. What would be better safety return investment? Replacing rolling stock or ETCS with ATO to prevent SPAD and overspeed? Well, this is certainly a thing to consider, but ultimately, I think pursue all of the above is the right response. Chris Jackson, Shinkansen train sets are being fitted with additional guard irons specifically to engage with the extra guardrails. That's interesting. So there's a lot to process. I think there'll be another episode of this where we process this in more detail and we look at the report. And I'll say less at the start because I spoke for an hour before breaking into the report. I should have seen that coming, really, shouldn't I? We'll pick into the report only and understand what the outputs are. But I think the critical thing, I think the key thing for me to communicate, is the HST should no longer be in regular service. Like that's for me, that's the takeaway. That's the key thing. The performance is not good enough anymore. I think also it's worth actually it's actually worth remembering the three people who died in the incident: Brett McCulloch, Donald Dinny, and Christopher Stuckbury. We talked about this. While we talk about the incident and what we can learn, we cannot forget the human tragedy involved. Brett was a father, had kids. It's not. We cannot lose sight of the human tragedy involved in these sorts of incidents. But hopefully the episode today has been useful in kind of maybe for some of you who haven't looked at crash reports. Maybe that's it kind of shows you the insights that you get from the kind of the modern crash reports, and indeed preceding privatisation. The BR reports are generally pretty good at picking out learning for the industry as well. And I think that's it really. I think we're going to kind of move into the next. Move into the end of the episode. So I don't know. Hopefully that's a long one in audio form. The podcasts are back up. I think Giel's computer's working again, so the podcast should be dropping back in again. So hello to everyone in the podcast, in podcast land. I think, I hope Jordan. Thanks for joining us, particularly as a driver on that line. I hope that was I hope this has been a piece that we've kind of looked at what we can learn and understand the issue, and hasn't kind of. I've not tried. I didn't want this to be a sensationalized sort of look at all these pictures of crash trains. That was not what this is about. It's about us learning from what's happened and avoiding it ever happening again. I really hoped. I'll tell you what. I'll talk about that momentarily. What else? Yeah, Patreon, Discord, and PayPal. Yeah, support me on Patreon. Do more of this. Discord. I'm sure the conversation will continue on the Discord server about this because there's been a lot of really interesting discussion going on. I'm conscious happening happening in the chat, which is really good. Lots of really good discussion. Please continue that in the Discord. Go into the safety space in the Discord. There is a safety dedicated channel. Because I'd quite like to go back through the conversation. If you're going to take it onto Discord, go into safety space and have the discussion there, because I think it'd be really interesting to kind of see some of the conversations that have been happening there. The next episode is episode 60. 60 of these, well, 61 technically. And the episode is going to be why bother with electrification? We're going to have a page turn through the latest rail industry kind of association report. I think it's a really good report. Gary, David Shearer's Hoops, Paul Hooper from Atkins, they were all inputting into it. Noel, of course, as well, Noel Dolphin, the big hitters, they've all inputted into it. I was actually in the early emails about creating this document, and I didn't get involved because I'm too busy, and to my eternal regret, because it's an awesome report, and it would have been cool to have my name against it, but that's my own fault for being too busy. That's next time. That should be an interesting one. Jordan, yeah, thanks for saying that. Yeah, it's... I go big face for a bit. It's got dark outside, and I've got bugs flying in because the window was open because it was quite hot. Jordan, yeah, thanks for saying that. For anyone, I don't know, there might well be other drivers and train staff, kind of on-train staff in the chat. Yeah, tough links to be absolutely valuable. Thanks, Jordan, for saying that. I just wanted this to... This is just a little podcast, right? I don't want to be pompous about but I always try and learn from things. I try every episode first to kind of learn kind of things for the future and what the railway should look like. And I hope that this is an incident basically when I never wanted to see another incident like this again in my lifetime. When I joined the railway, grey rig was already kind of had happened quite a long time ago. That's why I fight it. As soon as I came into it fairly quickly, I found myself looking at level boarding as an issue and understanding that as a source of fatalities and getting involved in that and changing and shaping that and doing a lot of platform work and projects. So I've got involved in that. I didn't expect to have to be dealing with fatalities from derailments. So it was a big shock when Sandylands happened. And then this, again, it was just an absolute shock to the system. Really was a shock to the system. And it's a bit strange then doing interviews on the day and talking about it. And it was pretty, it's upsetting. So hopefully it's been valuable. I really I think there's plenty for us to learn from this incident. There really is. I look forward to seeing you all for next week's episode. As I say, go into Safe Space on the Discord to have the conversation, to continue the conversation. I'm sorry this has been a longer one, but I think it's worth it. I know the numbers have trailed off. Hopefully people will pick it back up again. I will see you all. I will see you all next week. It's been a pleasure to have you along for the ride, and I will, till next time. Cheerio, everyone. Cheerio.